The story originates in a magnificent church. A small group of people gathered in it. Several priests stood at the altar while people were kneeling nearby. One of the priests said that he was announcing the result for Klaus. The priest said loudly that this guy's skill was called automation. The people who were watching began to whisper. None of them knew what it was. Everyone has heard of him for the first time in their entire lives. Klaus remained on his knees in silence. 15-year-old Klaus jumped up from his knees. At that time, the priest was talking about how automation was an incredibly rare skill, and they had a person with a unique skill. The knights who watched the ceremony said that they should definitely recruit the guy to the Metropolitan Order of Knights. Another group of people got into an argument saying that the guy should join their guild. A joyful Klaus lifted his hands and thought that despite the fact that there were many unique skills, he had every chance that it would be an incredibly powerful skill. Klaus looked up at the sky and thought about the possibility that he would become a celebrity among adventurers. Dreams and hopes overwhelmed the guy. After a while, the wind howled in the misty forest. Klaus stood alone in the forest. He recalled that he'd once thought that way. After 3 whole years, he still hasn't achieved anything. He was already 18 years old, and his level is 10th. Klaus decided to explain what this automation is. At the first skill level, he helped to use auto-return. This is an opportunity to automatically return home from the dungeon, and so on. This ability allowed him to do just that. The second skill level was auto-displacement. It made it possible to move automatically between country locations. This function only meant that at the moment when he came to, he was already at his destination. But that was it. Klaus shouted that it had been over 2 years, and he was still a low-level novice adventurer. He clenched his hands into a fist, thinking that at this rate he would simply lose his patience. Many people from the guild treated him badly, calling him useless. They laughed at Klaus's skills and abilities, saying that he was not capable of anything. They told him that he should give up such a life himself. Someone had told him bluntly that Klaus was an empty place. They asked what he could do, saying that he should change the direction of his actions, and then laughed at him. However, no one would hold him. Such words hurt him. However, he wasn't going to give up. Klaus was fighting goblins. In the forest, after the guy managed to defeat the little goblins, he got to their boss, the hobgoblin. He held a small dagger in front of him. Klaus was breathing heavily when he said he would end the monster here and now. He exclaimed that it was the first time he had gone to the cleanup alone. He had been an adventurer for 3 years. All these 3 years he has been working hard to become a better adventurer. The guy rushed at the monster, who, in turn, also raised his baton and prepared for a heavy attack. Klaus ran forward and wounded the goblin in the arm, after which he quickly turned the weapon in his hand so as to deliver another blow. In the blink of an eye, he turned around and cut the monster's torso. The goblin fell dead, lying behind Klaus as he calmly got to his feet, trying to catch his breath. The guy himself was extremely surprised that he was able to kill a hobgoblin. After he finally caught his breath, he walked over to the monster's body. He removed the upper part of the muscles from the goblin, then pulled out the hobgoblin's magic stone from its chest. The main character took out a stone from the hobgoblin and held it on his hand. He raised his blade again, saying that this stone was much larger than that of ordinary goblins. After that, Klaus quickly hit the stone with his blade. The stone broke easily, after which the goblin's soul rose from it. At the same moment, all of Klaus's stats began to rise. The guy was able to reach the 11th level. Right after that, he smiled awkwardly. Klaus exhaled and said he was finally pumped. He was already beginning to think that the 10th level was the maximum he could achieve, because he had stayed at this level for too long. The main character opened his stats and said that he believes his peers have already reached the 50th level in 3 years. He sighed and said that, however, there was no point in envying the lives of others. He pinched his stats glasses and declared that it would be better for him to focus on himself. After that, he began to quickly pull them over to improve automation. Klaus smiled happily and said that he had finally reached the 3rd level of his skill. He clicked on it, praying that it would be useful. At that moment, he was thinking about all the words of people who said bad things about him because of his abilities and called both the guy and his skills useless. He was thinking about these taunts at the moment of pressing. He could only pray that it would turn out to be something useful. Klaus clicked on the upgrade, after which he saw that at the 3rd level, this skill gave him the opportunity to automatically collect resources. He stared in disbelief at what had fallen to him, after which he repeatedly asked himself about it, hoping to think about what he had imagined. The picture did not change. Seeing this, the guy fell to the ground in despair. He couldn't believe that this was just an automatic gathering of resources. The desperate guy was sitting on the floor and did not understand how this could be everything. Klaus started laughing hysterically at this. He said that expectations only bring bitterness, and people from the past told him smart things. He hoped for automatic treatment or rocking, but he only had to calmly pick grass. He decided that he had had enough for today. The guy used the automatic homecoming skill. A timer appeared in front of him, at the end of which he was already at the entrance to the house. Upset, Klaus went into the house and announced his arrival. He was greeted by a sweet little sister named Liz. She asked why he came back so late. Klaus smiled wearily, then apologized to her. He said that he had a pretty long hike. After examining him from head to toe, the girl screamed that he was all dirty again. She started pushing him in the back, driving him into the house. She said he should take a bath before dinner, and preferably quickly. Klaus asked her not to push so hard. The girl said that no matter how it was, he did a very good job. Klaus thanked her for those words. After a while, the girl set the table. She said that they had stale dark bread for dinner today, as well as stew of Chinese cabbage and bacon. The guy got out of the shower and thanked Liz for her efforts. He said he would join her as soon as his hair was dry. The girl dragged him through and sat him down at the table, telling him to go eat right now. She took his towel and said she would wipe his head herself. She did it quickly and briskly. Klaus screamed in pain and asked if he could do it himself. The girl said that the stew should be eaten before it gets cold, so he should not be naughty and eat in silence. She said that as soon as he eats, his mood will lift. Hearing this, Klaus was a little surprised. After that, he smiled awkwardly. The guy asked if it was really so obvious from him. Liz said it was natural, and then asked who he thought she was. Klaus said she was his little sister. Liz asked worriedly if something was going wrong at work again. Klaus quietly agreed with her suggestion. The girl quickly understood everything and asked if this meant that it was all about his skill again. The guy looked at the floor and agreed with her again, after which he awkwardly apologized. Liz didn't quite understand what exactly Klaus could be apologizing to her for, so she asked him about it. The guy said it was making too little money because of him, and she was having a hard time. He screamed that her father had never returned from the mission, and his stupid parents, who had taken her to their place, had also disappeared somewhere. He was obliged to earn money for the two of them, but he couldn't do it. Listening to this, Liz was saddened. The girl hugged Klaus tightly, stopping his monologue. The startled guy asked what she was doing. Liz asked if it was easier for him when she hugged him. The guy blushed and said that this was not the case, and the brother should not feel better from touching his sister's chest. Liz asked if he was confusing something. She said he was still a child, but he already had to work. She stated that he was clearly having a harder time than she was. The sister said that's why he shouldn't talk like that anymore. She asked if he would listen to her in this regard. Klaus awkwardly turned to her and tried to say something, but she did not let him do it. Liz interrupted him and said that he should stop worrying so much about his skill, because it wasn't very useful at first. She looked at him and said that very soon she would turn 15, and she would be able to get her skill. She stated that if everything went well, she would take care of him herself. She kissed him on the forehead and told him that they should live like this until then. After that, she awkwardly moved away from him. Startled, Klaus looked at the girl, who clearly felt no shame for this action. She jumped up and ran out of the room. Klaus asked in amazement where she was going because she was still a child herself. In response, Liz exclaimed that she had gone to bed. Klaus could only stare after her. The girl turned around and said that she would finally say that it was enough for her that he was just returning home. She smiled and then wished her brother a good night. Klaus couldn't find anything to answer her. After she left, he smiled and sighed. Thanks to her, he really felt better, and therefore he decided that tomorrow he would give his best. However, that evening, Klaus ate quietly. He still didn't know about some things. For example, that the unique skill that everyone kept laughing at would awaken very soon. That night, Klaus did not know about the true value of the third level of his automation skill. Automatically, you will definitely fulfill your goal. This was the most important feature of automation. The guy was standing in a resource-gathering location, also known as the Poisonous Swamp, and was waiting for something. The next day, he returned to this place and was genuinely amazed at what he found. There was a small amount of antidote herb called XZO on the ground where he left something yesterday. Klaus asked how this was possible. He picked up the grass in his hands and asked how it was. Today, he took a task to collect an antidote herb and came to this place. He was thinking that it was just as gloomy as usual. He activated his skill and said that he doubted that it would be useful, but he decided to try it anyway. He activated the grass auto-assembly. Suddenly, he noticed something unusual. There were many divisions between the resources that could be collected in front of him. Seeing thousands of names in front of him, the guy couldn't believe himself and his eyes. Klaus gently pressed the antidote herbs and laughed nervously, saying that this simply could not be. The system asked the guy for the amount of resources he needed to collect. The guy was quite surprised, but decided to enter 30 units. Klaus was even more surprised when the system indicated that it would only take 4 minutes to collect 30 units of grass. Klaus laughed nervously, thinking that, in that case, one herb would gather every 10 seconds. After Klaus started the timer, time flew by pretty quickly, and when he regained consciousness, there was already a decent amount of grass in front of him. He wondered if it could be that this was just a joke. After that, Klaus immediately rushed to the system. The main character decided that it would be a good idea to look for something rarer than the antidote herb. His gaze fell on the petrified grass. The system indicated the time of collection, at the end of which this type of vegetation was already in the hands of the stricken guy. He exclaimed that the petrified herb was beyond the average rarity, and the price for it was 50 times more than for the antidote herb. After finishing this, he decided that he would also collect 10 pieces of macho grass. Once the resource collection time was over, and this herb was also in front of Klaus, who was smiling greedily, the guy decided to see how long it would take to collect the rarest grass of the legendary class. Dragon Ear. You can earn a whole castle for just one of these things. He chose one such herb and saw that the harvest time was 127 hours, which definitely surprised the guy, because it would take more than 5 days. Klaus laughed and said that there was nothing to be surprised about, because there was no place where this grass could grow. He wondered where he might end up in 5 days. Suddenly, he stopped talking. It dawned on Klaus that in just 5 days, he would be able to obtain a dragon spike, a plant of the legendary class. At least, that's how it will be, according to his skill. The guy immediately turned around and thought what he could do in his case. According to the time, Klaus could determine the approximate location of rare items nearby. It was because of this that the guy came to another location to collect resources, also known as the Gorge of Lamentation. Klaus was in a state of resistance to the poison. This was due to his gas mask. He sighed and said he was there. It was a rather unpopular location, shrouded in a potent poison, the Gorge of Lamentation. However, Klaus knew for sure that there definitely had to be the grass he needed in this gorge. The price per piece is very high. The antidote herb at 1 silver apiece is nothing compared to this. In the system, Klaus chose the mandrake. Depending on its weight, he could get 10 times more gold. Without a doubt, it is a very rare herb. The legendary herb is mandrake. He clicked and saw how long it would take. Klaus saw that picking the mandrake would take only 24 minutes, after which he exclaimed that it would be easy. The guy activated the skill. At that moment, the timer moved, and the numbers on it ran faster and faster. That was until Klaus regained consciousness. As soon as he opened his eyes, he saw that there was a single mandrake sprout on his hands. The joyful guy lifted it higher in his hand. Klaus was thinking about Liz when he was happily shouting about what he had done. However, at this moment, a terrifying monster was standing behind him. At the moment when Klaus was shouting joyfully about victory, he heard something rise up behind him. After that, the second level of the detection skill was activated. Klaus turned around and to his surprise, he noticed that there were huge fangs behind him. The guy screamed loudly and fell back. In front of Klaus stood a huge and hungry monster in the classroom, a stone lizard. The monster swung its tail, hit the place where the guy had just been. Klaus flew back. The desperate guy started crying because he was trapped. Klaus couldn't believe that he had met a stone lizard there. It all seemed like a joke, because this location was very low level. Klaus sincerely did not understand exactly how a monster in the classroom could be there. Tears rolled down his cheeks when he had already decided that it was over for him. Memories of his little sister began to appear in front of the guy's eyes. He was apologizing to her, but suddenly he didn't understand at all what he was thinking at all. He didn't understand how he could even think about leaving her alone. The main character has already promised her that he will return home, and Klaus clearly decided that he would come back. He didn't care that he didn't even have a chance to win. He was going to return home anyway, where dear Liz was waiting for him. Klaus held up a dagger, and a mandrake sprout in front of him. Suddenly, the stone lizard turned away from him. Seeing this, the guy was very surprised, and her eyes started to water, observing the strange behavior of the monster. Klaus also noticed that he was holding a mandrake in front of him. The guy pulled the plant even further when suddenly the stone lizard was spinning, holding its head. Klaus understood what could have happened. He assumed that at the moment when he pulled the plant out of the ground, the mandrake screamed loudly, which attracted the lizard, also injuring it. Klaus quickly realized that the lizard was losing its health points due to the mandrake's screams. However, Klaus was unconscious during the automation. He couldn't see or hear anything. Raising his blade, he charged. He attacked the monster, which was curled up on the ground, saying that, in that case, everything would be over here only for the stone lizard. Blood gushed out of the monster in the next instant. It was a comeback story. Klaus, who was despised by the whole world, the owner of one of the most useless skills. Klaus went home with his cargo. He decided that everyone who treated him badly would be held accountable for it. When Klaus returned home, his little sister, Liz, was hanging up the laundry. When she saw the guy, the joyful girl smiled broadly and greeted him. Everything was extremely calm in the Adventurers Guild. Someone was cleaning up before the opening, and someone was still trying to wake up. Among those who were still waking up was the guild secretary, whose name was Taryn. The girl was smiling sweetly. She straightened her hair and sighed, saying it was time to work. Taryn turned back to where the even more tired girls were. Dissatisfied with such answers, the girl turned to them and said that the secretaries were the face of the guild, and they should wake up as soon as possible. The girls turned to Taryn and said that they were completely unable to sleep because of yesterday's overtime. She said that secretaries should always be graceful, like white swans, and should smile and not show their fatigue. The girls exclaimed that it was all because of the adventurers. The secretaries complained that they had overwhelmed them with a whole bunch of work. They complained that the adventurers did not show up at the guild for a whole week, and then brought a whole lot of different loot. They said that if Taryn knew how long it took to sort everything out, set a price, and then ship it. Taryn took a deep breath and said that whatever it was, they should at least wash up. Suddenly, one of the girls remembered and said that she hadn't seen Taryn's word for quite a while. The secretary asked what she was talking about. The second girl supported her friend and said that he had not appeared for several days. They said it was a veteran who was still a low-level adventurer. Taryn guessed they were talking about Klaus. She agreed that he had been gone for a long time. At the same moment, someone entered the guild building and greeted loudly. It was Klaus Noldor, with mountains of sacks behind him. The guy was smiling broadly. During this time, he had already managed to reach the 19th level. When the secretary saw Klaus, they were surprised. This was especially so because of how much he had brought. The girls have already started crying, thinking that this is happening to them again, so it has not been planned yet. They didn't understand where he got the monster's head from in the first place. They were afraid of another sleepless night. At this time, Taryn greeted Klaus with a sweet smile and said that he had come quite early today. Noticing Taryn's actions, the girls were extremely surprised, and she stood with her hands clasped in a lock and continued to smile sweetly at the main character. The secretary asked the latter about where he had been. Klaus told me that he went to the poisonous swamp and then all the way to the Gorge of Lamentation. Taryn asked if he had visited 2 locations at once. Now it's clear why he has so much loot. Taryn wondered what they should do, because almost everything is unplanned prey. Klaus immediately started apologizing. The girls were surprised that Taryn didn't even flinch. They thought she sounded like she was talking to a mirror. It was a completely different level for them. The second girl said that there was nothing like that and pointed to Taryn's legs, which were shaking terribly. The girl came up to him and asked if it was really the head of a stone lizard. She said that it was a fairly rare catch in the class, so she would like to keep it for storage or give it to specialists for processing. They realized that it was reflected in her legs. Taryn said that the most important thing for her was that Klaus returned safely. The guy awkwardly apologized to her, then began rummaging through the bags. Klaus said he had something else. From the bag, He took out a small mandrake, which was an S-grade material. At that moment, the ground cracked under Turin's feet. Klaus started shaking his head from side to side and asked in surprise what kind of sound it was. Taryn called his name. She frowned, then loudly turned to the guy and told him to go inside with her. Klaus asked, scared, why it was necessary. The girl forcibly dragged Klaus after her. The guy was asking if he had done something wrong. Taryn said that they would deal with him now, so he should not resist and calmly follow her. Immediately after that, the doors to this room slammed shut. After a while, Klaus was in the director's office. Someone was holding a small badge with information about Klaus Noldor, who was a D-class adventurer. It was Mrs. Salazar, who was the master of the guild. An elderly woman sat quietly and smiled. She told the shrunken Klaus that he should not be afraid, because he was not brought there to be told off. The woman raised her mug of tea and said that it was even the opposite, and she was going to praise the guy for a successful work as an adventurer. She also said that there was room for doubt in all of this. After these words of hers, they put the mandrake on the table, which he brought to the guild. The woman said that this plant is not so easy to get, so she wondered where he could get it. At that moment, both Taryn and Miss Salazar looked wary. The atmosphere in the room was tense. In response to this question, Klaus smiled broadly and said that he had found her by accident in the Gorge of Lamentation. Both girls looked at him with great disbelief and a smile on their lips. After a while, Klaus was still able to get out onto the street, where he joyfully raised his hands. He mentally turned to Lisa and said that he had succeeded, and he had not even lied once. He also managed to hide the involvement of his skill in this. Klaus realized that he probably shouldn't have worried so much. However, there was something else. He turned back to Liza, thinking about how much he had earned. 1 copper coin could buy a loaf of black bread, and 1 gold coin could buy 1,000 of the same bread. He had managed to earn 22 gold coins, and he couldn't wait to look at his sister's happy face. However, this was not all. Miss Salazar said that there was still a mandrake, the maximum value of which is about 250 gold coins. Klaus couldn't believe these numbers. The guildmaster said it was the maximum value, and the wholesale was about 65 coins. However, even as a guild, they did not conduct such large transactions. Miss Salazar asked if Klaus would agree to barter. They could offer him equivalent equipment or magic stones. In that case, he would receive 13 large, teardrop-shaped magic stones, but he only got 1 from the stone lizard, and he was average. In addition, Klaus happily stated that he was able to raise his level. However, everything was just ahead. Miss Salazar watched from the window of her office as Klaus walked joyfully out of the guild building. She didn't understand anything at all. The woman said that up until yesterday, Klaus was considered completely incompetent, but today he brings them an S-class ingredient, Mandrake. The woman also noted that, moreover, he was able to single-handedly fight a B-class monster, a stone lizard. She asked if Klaus was really just a D-class adventurer. She turned to Taryn, who was listening intently. The woman said that they needed careful monitoring of Klaus. She said that he would only become an indispensable figure, or everything would remain as it was before. At this point, they had to figure it out. Taryn instantly became serious and said that it would be fulfilled, and they would find out everything they could about him. After a while in the mountains, Klaus was setting up a small piece of equipment again, and he was wearing a hard hat on his head. He was adjusting a lantern on his head, which was on a protective helmet. He was preparing to enter an unpopular and poor beginner location, also known as the Twilight Mines. Klaus zipped up his helmet and said that his automation had already proven its effectiveness in the case of vegetation. Now he decided to try something else. At his 27th level, Klaus Nador entered the cave, saying that this time he would go for minerals. At that moment, someone was watching the guy. It was a girl, a scout in hiding. Klaus shouted the name of the Twilight copies. He said that 1,000 years ago, the ancient dwarves dug many tunnels in search of mithril. This time, the customer asked to get magical shining armor. In cities, in homes, magical shining stones are used everywhere. They are mined almost anywhere, so the small ones were given to children for pocket money. Klaus looked up and said there was one thing, but after that, the guy laughed out loud and declared that he had it. With a quick movement of his hand, the guy opened the status window, after which he proudly declared that he relies on automation in everything. Klaus opened the section with magical shining stones in the catalog and was surprised that he could immediately choose large ones. He was also struck by the short collection time, which meant that the stones were close to the entrance. Klaus laughed and said it was easy. He asked his sister to wait for him and then clicked on the screen. The guy didn't see anything wrong with that. After these words, he pressed the button, activating the automation of the third level, the auto-assembly skill. He laughed extremely loudly again and declared that the time had come to tear and throw. He said this about his own pickaxe for mining resources. The Girl Scout was silently watching the whole scene. Completely covered in dark clothes, she stood around the corner in the cave and watched Klaus. It bothered her that Klaus talked too much for someone traveling alone. After the girl walked away from Klaus, who was busy packing, she took off her hood and exhaled. She thought that no matter what, she still couldn't refuse her sister. She sighed heavily and wondered why it was she who had to do it for this low-level adventurer. It was Tiara, who was a mid-level adventurer. The girl turned to where Klaus had just been and noticed that he was no longer in place. She was surprised and wondered where he could have gone in such a short period of time. Tiara immediately jumped forward and took out her weapon. Tiara ran forward, not understanding where he had gone, because literally just now he was standing right in front of her. Suddenly she heard something hit the floor. She immediately turned around and saw that there were small stones on the ground that had fallen from above. Tiara looked up and saw that Klaus was already at the top of the cliff. The guy was climbing up extremely fast, not even thinking about stopping. She didn't understand how he could be there right now. Without thinking twice, she pushed off the ground and followed Klaus, wanting to stop the guy who was leaving her field of vision so quickly. She jumped from one rock to another, climbing up with incredible speed. Tiara wished that the guy didn't think that he could beat a mid-level adventurer like her. After that, the girl quickly climbed the slope where Klaus had been a moment ago. To her surprise, she saw something she clearly could not have expected. The guy jumped from one slope to another as if they were small rocks. After another jump, Klaus stopped on one of the slopes, holding a pickaxe in his hands. At this time, Tiara could only watch him. The girl was genuinely amazed by what she had just seen. Out of breath, she stood and stared with her mouth agape. While Klaus was successfully mining magic stones, Tiara wondered who this crazy guy was. Klaus quickly extracted the ore, after which the car assembly time was over, and he regained consciousness. As soon as Klaus opened his eyes, he saw in front of him neatly stacked magical shining stones of large size in the amount of 20 pieces. Klaus held the pickaxe in his hands, looking at how expensive the stones sparkled right in front of him. Looking at this, he couldn't help but smile smugly. He was extremely glad that even the minerals were in his access zone, and he could safely mine them too. He took one stone in his hand and, laughing, said that without a doubt, it was 20 large, magical, shining stones. For the task, he needed to collect 200 of the same. He thought that he might be too naive. However, there were a lot of them in that place. Klaus exclaimed that if he dug a little, he would immediately come across another stone. He wondered if it could be that he had found a whole deposit. Klaus suggested that if he was lucky, he might even dig up a very large stone. As he had originally assumed, he was actually able to find what he wanted so much. The joyful guy was holding a huge magical shining stone in one of his hands, and in the other was a very large magical shining stone. The guy was jumping for joy and shouting his sister's name, saying that he had succeeded, and today they were probably waiting for a grand dinner. Tiara, who was watching the guy, wondered why he was shouting again and not working silently. As a result, after a while, Klaus managed to complete this task, collecting 200 large stones, 5 very large ones, and 1 huge magical shining stone. After a while, Klaus successfully transferred all the magical glowing stones into a large bag. Finally, he was able to put the shovel and pickaxe on the ground. The guy sat down on a rock and sighed. He said that he completed the task in just a moment. Klaus stated that the skill of automatic resource collection really turned out to be just incredible. He proudly opened the system and started flipping through it. In addition, other minerals such as copper, iron, lead, silver, and gold could be selected for collection. Even a fusible stone or magical iron, everything was available to Klaus. He started flipping through the catalog, saying along the way that he could probably choose any mineral he had encountered before. He started flipping through the pages below and noticed those minerals that had not been there until recently either. Anyway, that doesn't mean it's easy to get. Many high-grade minerals took over 100 hours to collect. He sighed and said that it didn't look like he could be as lucky as he was last time with finding a rare mandrake. As soon as Klaus said this, he saw a rare S-class mineral in the catalog, a ghostly shining stone that took him only half an hour to search. The guy was genuinely shocked by such a find. The ghostly shining stone has the ability to accumulate magical power, and therefore it is in great demand among wizards. The guy started shouting joyfully because he found exactly what he needed. He exclaimed that it was another rare material that can be mined in a couple of dozen minutes. Tiara, who was sitting behind a rock, was scared enough. She peeked out from behind the stone and started looking at him. At that time, Klaus did not understand at all why the ghostly shining stone was in such a place, because these stones are mined only in cemeteries. However, Klaus decided that this was not what was important to him right now. He kept thinking about whether he should take the risk or leave it as it is. That was the guy's main question. He understood that there might be such a problem as with the mandrake. When he wakes up after the end of the skill, he can meet the most dangerous monsters. He knew that he was defenseless at this moment, and last time he almost died. He was really lucky that time that he was able to win and come back alive. If the lizard hadn't been scared off by the mandrake's scream, it wouldn't have been standing on the ground at that moment. But he also understood that it was worth considering the fact that at that moment, his level was much lower than it is now. At the time of the encounter with the stone lizard, he was at the 11th level. But now he was already at the 27th. Klaus exclaimed that, in addition, his fencing skills had improved, and he was able to purchase a new weapon, an obsidian dagger, which is effective against medium-level monsters. Thanks to the detection of the 3rd level, he can sense the presence of dangerous monsters. He punched the screen and said he still hadn't tested it, but he had a trump card as a last resort. He raised automation to level 4. The guy continued to hold his fist on the screen, while thoughts were in his head about whether he should go for it or come back now. However, he still made up his mind. The main character put a helmet on his head and thought he could handle it. After that, he activated his 3rd level automation, automatic resource collection. He thought that even if he didn't rush into an adventure in a low-level dungeon, he wouldn't be able to do it anywhere else. At that moment, Tiara looked at Klaus in disbelief. She did not understand what he was going to do now. That's what Klaus thought at the time. However, he will regret it in the future. Suddenly, there was a loud shout of warning for someone to dodge. The next moment, something huge fell on this place. Klaus and Tiara managed to avoid the attack. Right in front of them stood a huge monster in the form of a skeleton. They could only stare at the terrifying monster and the frightening fear that enveloped them. Klaus fell to the ground with a pickaxe in his hand. He could only stare at the monster in fear as Tiara held the dagger in her hands. There were a lot of different bones lying on the ground around them. Right after that, the skeleton attacked them. At that moment, loud screams of poor adventurers in terrible trouble rang out throughout the room. The past, about 30 minutes ago. Klaus stood and used the 3rd automation skill, which was also known as the automatic resource collection skill. He used it to collect a ghostly shining stone. The timer went forward. Minute after minute passed quite quickly, and thus the entire half hour passed successfully. As soon as the time allotted to search for the stone was over, Klaus regained consciousness. With a slight heaviness, he opened his eyes. As soon as he regained consciousness, he saw a small, neat stone in his hand. The guy looked quite surprised because at that very moment, he was holding a rare S-class item. The guy slightly squeezed the ghostly shining stone in his hand. Seeing the ghostly shining S-class stone in his hand, Klaus just couldn't contain his joy. He smiled broadly, jumped up high, shouting the name of the ghostly shining stone, and shouted joyfully that he was able to get it. During the jump, something crunched under my feet. He suddenly realized that the situation around him was quite unusual. The guy had a complicated expression on his face because he realized that he was in a strange place for him. The main character looked around and saw that everything around him was strewn with the remains of people. The guy screamed loudly, thereby expressing his misunderstanding and fear of this terrifying place. Klaus looked up, where he saw a lot of bookshelves. There were human skulls in all the shelves instead of books. Klaus staggered and assumed that this was a hidden cemetery of ancient dwarfs. He had once heard that it could be found in old mines from time to time. The guy was holding a ghostly shining stone in his hand, which served as a lantern for him, because it was very large and bright. Klaus sighed and resigned himself to the fact that the environment clearly did not cause the environment. His main question now was where he was and what kind of place it was. The pierced walls made him tense, especially in such an ominous place. The guy took out a pickaxe and slung it over his shoulder. After that, he quickly raised his hand and opened the system window, where he began typing something. On the screen, he saw a timer that showed 6 hours and 45 minutes. As it turned out, Klaus had discovered the first level of the automation skill, automatic return. He can always return home automatically from the dungeon or from the field. In other words, with the help of the skill, he will definitely be able to return to his home. Klaus wondered what he could do. Returning by automatic return was one option, but he was tormented by the question of what he could do with the ghostly shining stone. He had already seen a picture of himself sitting in an office right in front of Miss Salazar, with Taryn standing behind her. Both girls smile terribly and ask him where he got it all, but the guy can't answer it. Since this return only happens automatically, Klaus can't know where he's coming from or how he's going to get back. He imagined how the girls would laugh nervously when he told them that he had found it somewhere in the Twilight Mines, and you won't be able to keep silent about the skill. Walking forward, he said that at least he was glad it was just a creepy cemetery. He thought that if it was an underground cemetery, accidentally turned into a dungeon, then maybe when he wakes up there will be a lot of skeletons and evil spirits around. He walked forward, holding a ghostly shining stone. He said that, indeed, automation skills are convenient, but such a place to which he was brought is extremely dangerous. Noticing some kind of ledge in the building, Klaus turned the corner, holding his stone. Unexpectedly, as soon as Klaus approached this place with his ghostly shining stone, he saw Tiara holding a dagger in her hands. The girl was surrounded by human skulls, which only made the situation worse. As soon as they noticed each other, both even jumped in fear, because they did not expect to see this at all. Klaus immediately jumped away from the girl and exclaimed, asking if a ghost had jumped out in front of him. He screamed again, after which he looked closely at Tiara's face and did not quite understand if such a beautiful girl was catching ghosts. Tiara was somewhat at a loss because of Klaus's words. Suddenly, the girl heard something wheezing behind her. A silhouette began to appear behind her. Noticing something was wrong, Tiara jumped on Klaus, shouting at him to lie down. Right after that, a monster that looks like a skeleton jumped out of the wall that was behind them. Tiara and Klaus were lying on the floor, and their faces expressed completely different emotions. Klaus was scared, while Tiara looked at the monster that stood right in front of them with hostility. Suddenly, the monster, which was definitely a skeleton, screamed loudly. There was a neat helmet on his skull, and a small, torn raincoat hung on his body. Hearing the monster's ominous scream, Klaus and Tiara also screamed. This time, both adventurers had only fear in their eyes. They were definitely in an extremely difficult situation. With tears in his eyes, Klaus looked back. Unable to contain his fear, he screamed loudly, trying to run away as fast as he could. Together with Tiara, they ran as fast as it was possible for both of them. At the same time, a monster was running after them, whose legs were wrapped in bandages. Klaus was shouting something unintelligible. Tiara asked what he was talking about, in response to which Klaus asked what kind of huge skeleton it was that was running after them. Without stopping running, Tiara explained that this monster is different because it is such a low-level monster. She said that this skeleton is a mid-level monster, a skeleton knight. The skeleton knight is an undead creature that inhabits the depths as a guardian of an underground cemetery. Its peculiarity is that its strength varies greatly depending on the equipment. She added that, moreover, this was an individual who had greatly increased his strength. Tiara, with her abilities, would have a hard time fighting him. Klaus thanked her for saving him, and then asked who she was. Hearing this question, Tiara turned away from Klaus, not wanting to answer. At that moment, the guy looked at her and noticed something unusual that he hadn't been able to notice before. Klaus saw that this girl had bamboo ears in the shape of leaves. On top of everything else, Klaus also noticed that she had dark skin. He assumed she was the same age as his little sister Liz. He asked aloud if she was a dark elf. Tiara clenched her fist and, holding it in front of her, told him her name. After which she told him not to call her by race, because it was rude. After that, she called him names. She continued and told him not to dare to look at her with such an unpleasant look because it was disgusting. Suddenly, she noticed that he wasn't looking at her, so she decided not to pursue the subject. The skeleton was right behind them. He looked very stern. After the adventurers ran around one of the corners, the creepy monster began to look around, trying to find those who ran away from them so quickly. Wasting no time, Klaus and Tira continued to run, wanting to escape from this depressing situation. Suddenly, they noticed that the monster had seen them. Tira exclaimed that the skeleton was still running after them. When Klaus heard about this, he asked in a scared voice why this was happening. In an attempt to escape from the monster, Klaus asked how such a terrifying monster had followed Tira at all. In response, the girl asked how she knew about it. She wanted to say that she was stalking him, but hushed it up and said that everything was wrong, and she was just unexpectedly attacked when she was at the cemetery. Tira was about to say that even if Klaus said something she would not answer, when suddenly she stopped in mid-sentence. The adventurers saw that the passage they were running through was littered with debris from the building. Due to the impossibility of retreating, they could only stare at the wreckage in silence. The main character said that this is a dead end. After a few moments, the monster caught up with the guys. He was standing right behind Klaus, already swinging his huge sword, wanting to kill the guy. The skeleton began to attack him directly on the head, which was wearing a small helmet that Klaus had originally put on in order to avoid wounds while searching for minerals. Suddenly, there was a loud crash in the room, after which Klaus rolled head over heels on the floor. The guy dropped his pickaxe, continuing to roll with it. As soon as he stopped, he rubbed his head. Klaus saw that the attack that was originally intended for him was being held back by Tira. She held on as best she could, holding the enemy's huge sword with her small blades. The girl was shaking, holding on with the last of her strength. Suddenly she grunted, after which she said that the monster was incredibly strong and asked if it was really just an average level. Klaus turned to the girl who was holding back the monster. Suddenly, Tira screamed at the guy to run away. The main character was very surprised by these words. Tira told him not to think about her and to run away faster, because now he had the opportunity. She said that Klaus is a burden, so he should run away from there faster. At that moment, an expression of anger and helplessness appeared on his face, because he could not help her. After these words, he got up and began to run quickly towards the exit. Klaus didn't even look back at Tira, who was still holding back the monster. He ran with his eyes closed, holding his pickaxe in one hand. He understood that in such a difficult situation, there was simply no other way out. He said that he would not be able to hand over anything, because he is such a low-level adventurer, and there will be no help from him. At that moment, the image of his dear sister Liz flashed before his eyes, who, as usual, was smiling happily at him. Suddenly, he stopped and thought about something. There was a complicated expression on his face, and his eyes were empty. The next moment, he rushed in the opposite direction. Tira was already struggling to stand, holding the blades that saved her from death. After a moment, Tira saw that Klaus was behind the monster. The guy swung his pickaxe at the monster that attacked Tira. With a quick movement of his weapon, he hit the monster on its helmet. A ringing knock sounded in the room. The skeleton's helmet was damaged and bent because Klaus hit it with the sharp part of the pickaxe. After the loud knock, time in the room seemed to freeze. Tira was still holding her blades. And Klaus was in the air after the attack. The next moment, the skeleton's head turned towards Klaus, who was very surprised by this. The monster was full of rage and anger at Klaus, who attacked him from behind. With a quick movement, the skeleton knight turned to Klaus, simultaneously sending Tira flying with a thud. He hit Klaus, which also sent him flying backwards. Tira flew back and started coughing up blood. At the same time, the skeleton monster was looking at Klaus, making terrifying noises. The girl looked at Klaus with a heavy look and called him stupid, after which she asked why he couldn't just run away. Lying on the ground, Klaus stated that this would just be terrible behavior for him. He couldn't just leave a girl who looked like his Liz to fight while he was running away. Klaus started to get up from the floor with all the pride he had. He stated that he wanted to go home and tell his sister about it. He turned to the skeleton and said that he should prepare himself. With a quick movement of his hand, he opened the system. It would have been a blow without preparation. At this time, Klaus was already terribly injured and crippled, so he did not know what could come of it. It was a seal. A new automation skill, enhanced with the help of magic stones. However, he knew that no matter what he thought about it, it was too dangerous for him. When the monster was already standing behind Klaus, ready to attack, the guy managed to activate the 4th level of the automation skill. It was an automatic fight. Automation. The skill level is Automatic Return. Automatic Return can always automatically bring the user home from the dungeon field. The 2nd level of the skill is Automatic Movement. Automatic movement can always move the user to locations visited at least once before, such as dungeon, field of action, city, and the like. The 3rd level of the skill is Automatic Resource Collection. Automatic Resource Collection can always automatically collect resources that the user has found at least once. And the next one, the 4th level of the skill, is Automatic Combat. Automatic Combat can always lead the user's battle automatically with an opponent with whom the user has fought at least once. After Klaus entered all the necessary data about the opponent into the system, she showed him that the time required for the battle was 13 minutes. Klaus looked at the time and wondered if he would be able to fight for all these 13 minutes. He was already a level 5 adventurer. However, this opponent is a mid-level monster. Tiara was shaking all over, trying to get up. The girl screamed at Klaus to run away as fast as possible, because it might be too late soon. Klaus grinned with some heaviness and called the skeleton to battle. At that moment, he clenched his jaw so that a creak sounded. The guy pressed the coveted button, thereby activating the 4th level of the automation skill, Automatic Combat. As soon as his hand touched the activation button, his eyes closed, and the timer, which was 13 seconds long, hurriedly went forward. Almost immediately after, his entire body fell to the ground rather slowly. It looked like Klaus had just fallen asleep in that position. Tiara looked at the guy sitting motionless on the floor in disbelief. She didn't understand what was going on with Klaus. The monster turned to the guy in order to attack him. He had already swung his sword at Klaus. At that moment, Tiara screamed, asking if he was really asleep. As soon as the monster's sword approached the guy's head with its blade, he quickly dodged. It was so subtle and fast that it was hard to even see. In an instant, it was a strange sight. It looked like it happened by accident. Next, the skeleton tried to strike again. But this time, everything turned out exactly the same as the first one. Klaus only quickly dodged the attack. The monster swung again, but this time he did it from top to bottom. As a result of such an attack, Klaus only calmly rolled from one side to the other. As a result of such provocative actions by Klaus, the monster began to lose patience and get angry, because he could not defeat one guy. Noticing this, Tiara exclaimed, asking why Klaus had angered the monster in the first place. At the same moment, the skeleton began poking around the square, trying to hit Klaus with at least one blow, but the guy again successfully dodged all attacks. Due to the active pressure of the monster, a high column of dust rose in the room. Tiara was afraid that Klaus was dead, so she squeezed her eyes shut, not wanting to see what could happen to the guy. She thought he had turned into a human mess. At that very moment, Klaus rose from the dust with a quick jerk. He lightly stepped on the ground, then swept past the monster like a bullet. Holding a pickaxe in his hand, he attacked him hard in the chest. Tiara was speechless because she couldn't believe that Klaus could survive. She really didn't understand how Klaus was able to anger the monster, after which he lured it into a large-scale attack. The girl still couldn't figure out what the guy was going to do with the shovel and pickaxe he was holding in his hands during all these attacks. At the same time, Klaus deftly plunged the shovel into the ground. Immediately after that, he pushed off from the shovel and flew forward with a quick jerk, swinging a sharp pickaxe. In the blink of an eye, Klaus was behind the monster, who did not even have time to react to the guy's maneuver. With quick movements, Klaus severely wounded the monster on its torso, using only a pickaxe and his own strength with speed. Tiara stared at it all with her mouth agape in shock. She knelt slightly and watched the battle that had begun right in front of her. Suddenly, the monster's helmet fell to the ground. There was a ringing knock in the room after the metal came into contact with the surface of the ground. After such a confident attack, Klaus landed on his feet while the monster continued to stand behind him in a strange way. At that very moment, the skull of the monster that was standing motionless behind suddenly cracked. It didn't split as much, but the crack spread across the entire area. Tierra stared at the battle in disbelief, unable to utter a word. She didn't quite understand what Klaus had done to hurt the skeleton like that. The next moment, the monster slowly turned its head back to look at the guy. The monster itself was completely bursting with anger for the way it was wounded. It was so bad that steam was coming out of it. The evil monster ran back, wanting to finally defeat the annoying guy who was just sitting motionless on the ground after the last attack. The skeleton was swinging his weapon from side to side, burning with his own anger at Klaus. As soon as he got close to the guy, he started attacking him with all his strength, waving his weapon in all directions. Klaus, meanwhile, was completely calmly avoiding every attack as if it were something ordinary. The skeleton did not stop waving his weapon for a second, but Klaus dodged enemy attacks so easily and quickly that the monster could not get the guy with any of them. Suddenly, Klaus spun quickly and neatly so fast that his own cloak couldn't keep up with his speed, let alone the monster that was trying to defeat. After the guy was able to accelerate to the speed he needed, he attacked the monster with his pickaxe. It hit his spine and arms, causing him to drop his sword and shield. This movement was graceful and disastrous for the skeleton. At this time, Tierra sat silently on the floor and watched in amazement as the skeleton slowly died. After this attack, the monster hurriedly began to fall to the ground, while Klaus threw the shovel to the ground so that it stuck into the soil, after which he was able to stand on the handle of the shovel like a light feather. Startled by what she saw, Tierra stared at Klaus, unable to say a word. There were complex emotions on her face that she herself could only barely understand. Holding her dagger in her hands, she tried to figure out what she had just seen. At that moment, Klaus, who was still under the influence of his automatic combat skill, landed on a shovel. Tierra looked at Klaus and wondered what kind of guy he was. The timer, surprisingly, was still showing the remaining 8 minutes. After a while, loud shouts were already heard in the guild building. Someone was clarifying what had been said. Taryn was holding onto the reception desk while her feet had already created huge cracks in the floor. At this time, Klaus looked at the girl in fright, not knowing what to say to her. The startled girl couldn't believe her eyes. Right in front of her was a neat ghost stone wrapped in a small piece of cloth. The girl glared at Klaus and asked if there really was a ghost stone in front of her. Her scream was so loud that everyone who was in the guild building at that moment turned to the guys. Klaus tensely told Taryn that her voice was very loud. The girl tried to say how huge the stone was, but Klaus covered her mouth with his hands and repeated his words, that she had a very loud voice. He said people would ask questions. All the wizards turned their gazes to the two people who awkwardly fell silent at the reception desk. They couldn't believe what they were saying about such a rare item, and even thought it was some kind of mistake. The girl did not stop smiling as she glared at Klaus, silently asking if Klaus knew about the value of the item he brought to this fairy table. Without letting go of Taryn's face, Klaus laughed awkwardly and said that he seemed to have done something again. Taryn looked at him and said with a look that she was tired, so he had better keep quiet. The girl stared at Klaus intently, mentally asking the guy if he knew what she wanted to ask him so much. Klaus awkwardly looked away and mumbled that he must know. But there was something else that prevented him from continuing. Klaus looked away very intently, already anticipating that they would start asking questions again. Klaus hated it with all his soul, because it was the place of those frightening people. Suddenly, the guy felt the atmosphere in the room noticeably heavier, and the door that was behind Taryn slowly opened, and fear and horror began to emanate from behind her for poor Klaus. The guildmaster, Miss Salazar, stood outside the door and silently watched everything that was happening at the reception desk. She was holding the door with her metal hand, and she was smiling really terrifyingly at the same time. Miss Salazar stretched her hand out the door and slowly squeezed it, then took out her index finger and slowly called Klaus to her, using only a hand gesture. At this moment, the girls who worked at the registration turned pale. Mrs. Salazar shouted loudly for Klaus to go ahead. At that moment, her face became stern, and her gaze dropped from top to bottom. Seeing such a picture, Klaus was terribly scared and screamed, all the blood that the guy had drained from his face. The guildmaster, without lowering her tone, still shouted, asking Klaus if he was afraid of her. Taryn proudly closed her eyes and said that she would escort Klaus to the office of the guild director, Mrs. Salazar. After a while, the picture that had already been in the past was repeated again. Klaus folded his hands on his legs and stared at the floor, afraid to look up. On the table in front of everyone, on a piece of cloth, there was a rather large, ghostly, shining stone. Summing up, Miss Salazar smiled eerily and asked where Klaus was able to get such a rare mineral. At this time, Terran silently looked at Klaus and the stone, analyzing what was happening. Klaus laughed awkwardly and claimed that he got it completely by accident. Mrs. Salazar got angry, and because of this, she impatiently asked Klaus where exactly he got the stone. There was aggression in her voice. Almost in unison, both girls asked if he had mined this ghostly, shining stone of enormous size in a location called Twilight Mines when he was mining other minerals for the task he had taken. Klaus agreed with this, after which he said that it was completely accidental. The girls laughed incredulously, repeating the absurdity that Klaus had said about the Twilight Mines. The guy said that it was amazing for him too. The girls repeated Klaus's words about how amazing it was. At that moment, there was even more disbelief in their voices. Miss Salazar took a deep breath, then took out her monocle and brought it closer to her eye. Mrs. Salazar asked Klaus if he knew how much such a stone costs. She turned to Klaus, trying to say something, after which she changed the wording and said that this ghost stone was extremely large. Klaus didn't quite understand the lady's words. The guy asked if such a stone was worth about 1 gold coin. He started mumbling something about how this ghost stone should be attached to the staff of the Archmage. The girls confirmed his words. Miss Salazar looked down and said that there were incredibly few such stones. It could be compared to 1 little finger. Klaus didn't quite understand what she was talking about. Miss Salazar asked out of interest if Klaus knew of an unusual legend. This is an illustrated legend about a great magician who followed a brave man of a certain country who once defeated an evil dragon. Klaus said he heard her. He said that this story is a historical reality, but the stone that is attached to the end of the wand of the great magician is a very expensive stone. This stone was a ghost stone the size of a large fist. At that moment, Klaus smiled stupidly, after which he saw a ghostly shining stone that lay right in front of him on a neat piece of cloth. Klaus started to get nervous. He raised his hand, then clenched it into a fist. He didn't stop smiling when he was doing all this. At that moment, many thoughts were flying through his head, but he could not say anything. The main character looked at his fist, then turned his gaze to the ghostly shining stone. After that, he looked at his hand again and began to shake, because he realized that this stone completely corresponded to the size of a large fist. At this time, Miss Salazar was smiling silently, looking down. She shook her head when she saw how confused Klaus was, who still did not unclench his fist and continued to compare his hand with a ghostly shining stone. This silence was interrupted by Mrs. Salazar, who sternly exclaimed that the ghostly shining stone that Klaus found and brought to the guild belongs to the class of a national treasure. Upon hearing this incredibly loud statement, Klaus also panicked and screamed loudly in surprise and some fear. It was only at this moment that the guy realized what he had brought to the guild. He also understood the reasons for the girl's anger. Klaus gaped at Mrs. Salazar in silence. He exclaimed loudly, asking if this national-level class was relevant here in their country. The lady said that if you convert all this into gold coins, then at the retail price, it will come out somewhere at least 600 gold coins. Klaus screamed loudly, unable to believe what he had just heard. Mrs. Salazar smiled and said that there were probably thousands, maybe about 2,000 gold coins on the table in front of them. On top of everything else, she said that this ghostly shining stone is able to enhance the magical power of magicians. Shocked, Klaus was shaking with realization. Miss Salazar shook her head and smugly stated that this was exactly the reaction she wanted to see initially. However, she turned out to be even more fussy than she could have expected. Mrs. Salazar placed a small tray with a large number of gold coins on the table. She said that if he buys this ghostly shining stone from the guild, then its wholesale price alone will be 100 gold coins. The guy looked at this money in incredible shock. He couldn't take his eyes off the huge amount of money that lay on the saucer in front of him, like a gift from God. He only knew that 100 gold coins was far from small. Klaus knew that 100 gold pieces was many times more than for a mandrake, the payment for which was only 65 gold pieces in bulk. He looked greedily at the money and thought that he might not be working in the next few years at all. Suddenly, Mrs. Salazar asked if it could be that Klaus would like to buy magic stones with this money this time. Terran placed a small box in front of him with 5 large magic stones that cost 100 gold coins. Klaus looked in amazement at the stones that were lying right in front of him at that moment. Taryn calmly held the box in front of Klaus, patiently waiting for his decision. For Klaus, these stones shone no less than the money lying on the other side of him. With a great heaviness in his soul, Klaus raised his hand in order to make the final choice in this difficult matter. At the same time, Miss Salazar was stirring up the atmosphere, asking what Klaus should do. Having overcome all his greed and desire to live well, Klaus turned his index finger with great effort towards large magic stones that would help him become stronger. Miss Salazar smiled significantly and came to the conclusion that Klaus was stubbornly moving towards the top. She asked if this was the case, after which she herself said that, in her opinion, it was simply excellent. Taryn still didn't look at Klaus, but she took stock and said that thanks to the guy's purchase of magic stones, he would also make his own, and far from small contribution to the work of this wonderful guild. The guildmaster said that if Klaus takes too much of the magic element of these magic stones in a short period of time, there is a high probability that an explosion will occur, so he should be careful. 366. By this time, it was already night outside, and the street lights were on. Eventually, Mrs. Salazar and Taryn kicked Klaus out so that he could go home. In disbelief, the guy went home. In disbelief, the guy went home. He still didn't understand exactly what had happened. The girls asked Klaus if the guy wasn't alone in this little adventure. The guy confirmed this and said that he certainly would not have been able to defeat such a strong monster alone. He said that everything happened completely by accident. Klaus said that if there wasn't a middle-ranked adventurer there, he wouldn't be standing now. Taryn tensed. Miss Salazar smiled and asked how it happened that she happened to be there by accident and what happened to her. Suddenly, Klaus remembered what had happened that day. His timer was running out because there were only 9 seconds left on it. At that moment, the guy was behind a pile of bones, after a quick jerk and a small dagger attack into the monster's skull. Due to the successful attack on the monster's head, the skull split, and the dagger plunged into a small mass that was inside the head of a dangerous middle-class monster. There were only 6 seconds left on the timer. At this time, Klaus was standing motionless, when suddenly there was a loud explosion behind him, which occurred from the monster's skull once. The explosion itself resembled a skull in its shape. There was only 1 second left on the timer as Klaus stood in the dissipating cloud of dust that had risen after the explosion. At the end of the timer, Klaus slowly opened his eyes and stared at the floor in silence. Suddenly, terrifying pains rang out all over the guy's body, which made him cringe and cough up blood. Shocked by such unexpected pain, the guy fell to the ground and screamed loudly. Klaus rolled on the floor, wanting to do something about the pain, and wondering if there was at least one whole bone left in his body. At this time, Tiara calmly walked towards the helpless guy with slow and confident steps. The girl put an unknown wand in poor Klaus's mouth. The guy asked what she had done, after which he suggested that it might be a low-ranking potion. He asked if Tiara had anything besides these drugs. Without losing her composure, Tiara handed the guy a bottle that was slightly larger than her hand. She asked if he really decided to die in this place in this way. The main character quickly began to absorb the medicine that was in this bottle. He was genuinely amazed at the speed of his recovery. He asked how he was able to heal so quickly. Klaus asked if she had given him some kind of advanced potion. He said that such a potion would probably cost about 1 gold coin. Tiara stated that adventurers should take better care of themselves. The guy was awkwardly drinking the liquid. He said he didn't know anything about it because he is, after all, one of the majority of adventurers who have low levels and abilities. After that, he fell silent and continued to drink the medicine. Suddenly, Klaus remembered something and decided to ask Tiara if the girl had an average level of abilities. The girl proudly confirmed this information, after which she added that it can already be said that she is a veteran. Klaus turned to the girl and skeptically asked what, in that case, the veteran could have forgotten in such a dungeon. He also added that they were in a beginner's area, which rarely anyone comes to at all. At that moment, Tiara remembered that she was actually on a reconnaissance mission. The girl swore loudly, which caused the guy's bewilderment. She said she had completely forgotten that she was supposed to meet someone there. Surprised, Klaus asked her what kind of meeting could be scheduled in such a place. Immediately, the girl ran away from there, saying that she needed to go. He was trying to tell her something. Tiara said he could thank her later. At this time, in Miss Salazar's office, the guildmaster and Taryn were tensely waiting for someone. There was silence in the room. The next moment, Tierra sank to the ground and bowed her head. Taryn looked at the girl with one eye, while Mrs. Salazar asked with displeasure if Tierra wanted to tell her anything. Tierra looked guiltily at the floor. Mrs. Salazar, without turning to the girl, said that they had high hopes for the elf. A tense Tierra began to apologize for her misconduct on a reconnaissance mission. She looked at the floor and said that there was no excuse for her, but she added that the guy was behaving very strangely and suspiciously. And after that, during the mission, this terrifying skeleton appeared. Mrs. Salazar was looking out the window. The guildmaster ordered that, in that case, Tierra tell her what she should have done when the observed object noticed her. Upon hearing this, Tierra apologized loudly and guiltily for the mistake again. The guildmaster said that, in any case, fortunately, everything turned out well enough. She also added that with Tierra's help, Klaus's life was saved. Hearing this, Tierra felt a little awkward. Miss Salazar said that only this time she would allow herself to turn a blind eye to such a thing. But next time, Tierra simply would not be able to avoid the consequences for such a serious mistake on a mission. After Miss Salazar finished scolding the girl, Tierra raised her gaze and looked worriedly at the master of her guild. Noticing this, Miss Salazar asked if there was anything left that she hadn't told. Tierra awkwardly and slowly turned to the guildmaster and informed him that the events did not happen exactly as they imagined. Tierra looked at the floor and said that she had not defeated that skeleton. After that, there was a momentary silence in the room. Miss Salazar, with a stern expression on her face, finally turned to the girl and said that she did not quite understand what this mid-level adventurer said. The guildmaster asked if Tierra meant that she dealt all the main damage to the monster, but that low-level adventurer Klaus finished it off. Tierra squeezed her eyes shut and said that it wasn't like that. She looked away and cringed. Tierra tried to find the words with which she could explain that she, of course, wanted to help Klaus, but the result was surprising for herself. The girl recalled the main events that took place that day on the battlefield. Klaus held the pickaxe impressively in his hand while the monster tried to attack him from behind. Klaus reached out to the skeleton, literally provoking the monster. He began to beckon him over with his hand. As soon as the skeleton charged with his huge sword, Klaus neatly and abruptly dodged the attack. After an unusual evasive maneuver, Klaus used a shovel that was on his leg. He lifted the shovel along with his foot, then hit the monster's head with it. After that, he struck a second blow with the same shovel, but this time he hit him from the bottom up. After an unusual series of attacks, Klaus struck the monster's head with a pickaxe, piercing the spine and the neck area. After finishing that, he instantly changed the location of the pickaxe and struck another blow using a dagger. In the next moment, he used a shovel to drive the dagger to the end with it, killing the monster with the ends. Tierra said that in the end, Klaus was able to defeat the monster alone, while the girl herself was at a loss. He had already dealt with it. Miss Salazar looked at the girl in disbelief, then turned away from the window. She said she was sorry because she believed Tierra. The elf rushed forward and exclaimed that it was the truth, and she was not lying. She can't say exactly how it happened, but he definitely did it himself. At that time, Taryn was talking to the secretary. Miss Salazar asked if Tierra claimed that Klaus actually managed to defeat a mid-level monster alone. Tierra exclaimed that it was true. At that time, Tierra was reading some documents and was shocked. The girl turned to the guildmaster and said that this was not the case, and everything was a little wrong. At one point, all the attention that was in the room became attached to Tareen. The girl said that she now had in her hands a list of items that Klaus had brought, and if you trust his calculation, then the monster he had defeated was the skeleton general. Talking about it, Taryn looked worried. In other words, she said that the monster that Klaus defeated was of high rank. But even Tierra would not be able to defeat him on her own or with the help of a low-level person. Startled, Ms. Salazar asked if this meant that the monster had been defeated after all by that low-level adventurer Klaus Noldor. They didn't understand who this guy was at all. At the same time, a joyful Klaus was at the market. He was happy, because this time he would finally be able to eat good meat. After that, he asked the seller to give him some good meat. In response, the seller said that he had a fish shop. At this time, Miss Salazar and Taryn were standing around poor Tierra. They asked the girl if she wanted to tell them more about what happened in the dungeon. she exclaimed that she didn't know herself, to which they called out her name. There were entries in the work diary for a certain month and day, the authors of which were Terran. They wrote about Klaus Noldel, a collector who belonged to a certain guild. In the foggy forest location, which was intended for beginners to fight monsters, since they were of low rank there, it was necessary to collect some things. According to the report from the drop list, some of the things that fell out were the ears of ordinary goblins in the amount of 224 pieces, the ears of goblin leaders, 23, the ears of goblin leaders, 5, and also the ears of hobgoblins, 1 piece. Also in the same location, it was necessary to get the fangs of ordinary kobolds in the amount of 389, the fangs of kobold soldiers, 22, and the fangs of bis-kobold, 7 pieces. A few nuclear fragments of green slime in the amount of 21 pieces and the shoots of Little Trent are just 1 piece. Various loot that belonged to the monsters was also collected. Old daggers that were in the hands of goblins and kobolds, old hatchets, short spears, old clubs, and a rough club that fell from the boss. Shields, magic small stones, red stones, also small, blue small stones, green and yellow small stones, and rainbow stones. That day, when Klaus came and brought it all in one go, the guild workers were amazed that he managed to carry away everything in such quantity. They were mad at him. The girl who made the inventory was also shocked. Trying to keep smiling and contain her emotions, her writing hand broke in her hands. After handing over all these goods, Klaus was able to get a good return in exchange. 26 Lottie coins, 130 silver, and 70 bronze, and this was very good money in this world. Klaus happily threw back his head and scratched his head. Smiling broadly, the guy was glad that he had managed to enrich himself so much. He tried not to show that it was all due to his skill. Such a reaction simply amazed the guild staff, who had to work for more than 1 day on so many extracted resources. The girls grimly restrained themselves so as not to bring themselves to hysteria. The class has already said that a couple of days after awakening the automation skill, his routine changed a lot. The girl at the counter, seeing the guy again, said that he brings a lot of goods. The girl, trying to somehow contain this flow of objects, decided to ask the young man again, saying whether he thought it would be hard for him to carry everything alone. Klaus, who was in a good mood, gave a thumbs up, which he showed to the girl, smiled broadly, and said that it was easy for him, and everything was fine. The girls behind started screaming, shedding tears. This guy increased their workload many times, and now they had to work day and night long. Klaus continued to behave as hopelessly as possible, as if he didn't understand anything. He only looked with a smile at those who had already cursed him for such a service. The drop list report looked as follows: 253 goblin parts, 418 kobolds, 21 slimes, and 1 Trent, as well as 178 pieces of equipment and 164 pieces of magic stones. The girls thought that all this devalued their work, but they understood well that they could not forbid him to kill monsters, because they had no rights to do so. Throwing back his bag of coins, Klaus deftly turned around and walked proudly towards the exit. The guy still had a lot of work to do today. Smiling, Klaus thought that after he was able to master the skill and understood how it worked, it was extremely easy to pull this off. The skill did everything by itself, for him. The guy also thought that he wanted to test it again. What happened in the last battle, when the automation skill was activated, had to be repeated. But the risk remained too high. Then Klaus managed to defeat only one of the high-ranking monsters. But what if this time, there will be several of them, or there will be different types of enemies? In any case, it was necessary to check everything. So soon Klaus found himself back in the misty forest, which was full of enemies for novice adventurers. At that time, the adventurer, who was referred to as Klaus Noldor, had level 38. The guy stood up proudly with his hands on his waist and said that he had finally arrived and this was the best place to check. The 4th level of automation was automatic combat. Even if the guy can't cope, there are no such dangerous enemies for him here, because he knew this area like the back of his hand. So far, there was no one in front of him. And the guy was just standing in the middle of the forest alone. He decided to activate the skill, and soon the timer that delimited his skill began to go. And here is the result, which was simply stunning. Klaus stood with his weapon out, and around him were a bunch of defeated enemies of different races and classes. On that very day, all the monsters from the Misty Forest were destroyed wherever they were. Apparently, the skill was chasing absolutely everyone, not giving them the opportunity to escape. Klaus was very pleased to realize that there was not a scratch on him. He just closed his eyes, and when he opened them, he didn't think that even his strength would recover. Soon the monsters will be reborn anyway, flooding the forest again. The main character continued to stay in the misty forest. The guy has used this technique for the 10th time, and every time it works, killing everyone in its path. Automatic combat was an ability even more incredible than Klaus had thought. Now the guy could, without hesitation, defeat anyone who was weaker than him and even stronger. Klaus closed his eyes and bowed his head, saying that the cooldown and the inability to choose a target to attack still remained. Not that this technique has disadvantages, but, so to speak, its limitations. Kakode or skill recharge is the time it takes to fully recover. Only after it will it be possible to use the ability again. Klaus, looking around the battlefield, realized that he couldn't keep the ability active all the time, but that didn't make him any weaker. But nevertheless, Klaus had a minute to recover. That is, his skills will be frozen before he can use any of their techniques again. Therefore, even if a guy uses an automatic resource collection function, for example, while after the appearance of an enemy, an automatic interception function. After that, Klaus thought that no, he couldn't do that. Of course, he could use the function, which he also called make legs, but it is also limited to cooldown. Another disadvantage is the inability to choose a goal. As far as the guy remembers, when using the automatic combat function, you can encounter the enemy that you have already fought before. Or you can stumble upon someone you've never even met, like the time when the general of the skeleton army appeared in front of him. However, somehow, the result was already known to you. To fulfill all the conditions for the operation of this automatic combat technique, you need to strike at least one blow, which will cause some, albeit a small amount of damage. The guy knew perfectly well that if he could win thanks to this, that is, he would definitely become his trump card. In this case, Klaus will be able to strive for the very top of the world. It was already late at night. Having collected and given away all the resources, of which there was a huge amount, the guy began to gradually return home, stuffing his pocket with coins. Cautiously opening the door, the guy turned to his sister, already starting from the threshold to say that he was too carried away by checking skills, that he had completely forgotten about time. He also added that, in addition, the bags were heavy, which slowed the young man down. After asking her sister if she had already eaten or not, a ladle was already flying towards Klaus. Klaus didn't even have time to finish his words, apologizing and saying that he was already here, as this thing crashed into his forehead clearly, and then flew back into Lisa's hands. The guy even had a small wound on his forehead, which was not left for him today by hordes of monsters. Lisa came out on the threshold and waving her hand said that it was too late today. Lisa was very angry now, even though the girl was only 15 years old. She continued to demand an explanation, saying that Klaus had promised to come early today. The girl pointed the ladle at the guy again, from which Klaus began to close himself and said that as punishment, he would eat cold soup. The young man, in turn, shouted once again that he would explain everything. Liz kept repeating the words of the named brother that he was getting carried away with something there again. And when he finished in the yard, he noticed that it was already night outside. The girl said, "He always does that." When Klaus asked her how Liz knew everything, the girl said that she understood the young man. He is happy that his new skill is progressing, but he needs to be careful not to get seriously injured again. Klaus was shocked to think that the girl had just told him about his battle with the skeleton general when he was saved by a healing potion. It was then that Klaus thought that with the help of Tiela's advanced potion, everything would go away, but the guy still had fresh wounds. And when Liz found out about all this, she scolded him very much. Klaus lowered his head and smiled shyly, thinking that, after all, his little sister had always been like this, and worried about him like no one else. He kept making excuses, apologizing. The guy scratched his head and said that he had not done anything dangerous today and was ready to answer all her questions. Liz said that he could only redeem himself with gifts. After that, the girl immediately added that if he would take a kitchen set, then the one from Mithril would be special. Klaus remembered that this was the set that the girl had seen in the city. It cost an insane amount of money, as much as 12 zloty coins. The girl smiled, realizing that the guy remembered him. Klaus said he could buy it, of course, but didn't Liz laugh at the fact that they were cooking a dragon in it? The girl then said that it was very stupid, but all rich people do it. The girl began to turn around slowly, holding her wooden weapon in her hands, and said that she would not cook a dragon in this set but Klaus himself. Liz began to laugh maliciously, sharing with her brother the thoughts that the next time he returned wounded, he would meet him with a mithril ladle. Klaus stretched out his hand, clenching his teeth, and said that it hurt terribly. Liz said she wouldn't forgive him even if his brother cried and begged, because he shouldn't hurt himself with such outings. After that, the girl turned around and asked if Klaus agreed to such conditions. The girl said that this was exactly what his promise should be, and if he broke it, then he definitely would not live. Klaus raised both hands, silently bowed his head, and smiled submissively. The guy said he was making a promise that he wouldn't overload himself. He also added, saying that no matter what happens, he will always return home to his sweet and beloved sister. The girl became alert after such words and began to turn around. Klaus started to get up and dust off his clothes. The guy understood that his sister was right and nothing good would happen if he overdo it. After that, Klaus said that he would now go to the bathroom. But on the other hand, the guy couldn't stop there. Grinning, Klaus thought that this did not mean that he had to make his sister cry. After that, the guy turned to his sister, called her beloved again, and said that her brother would like the soup to be warm after all. Liz shouted that she understood everything and would warm it up while Klaus was in the bathroom. When they had already sat down at the table, he began to boast that he had been able to earn 27 gold coins today. Liz said it was cool. Klaus understood that he needed to give his best, and he and his sister would not need anything. And there was something else that Klaus was able to acquire. The next day, the guy ran out into the street and was already leaning on a cart pulled by an animal. The main character was waiting for Liz to come out on the street to immediately brag about her. The girl came out holding a small bundle in her hands and immediately smiled, not understanding where Klaus got it from. Liz asked her brother what it was. She handed over the bento, and Klaus exclaimed that it was the newest cargo donkey that the guy was able to borrow from the guild. The girl leaned on the guy, looking behind him, where the donkey continued to stand. She said that she understood about the cart, but did the boy decide to become a trader? Klaus said it was for traveling. Klaus also proudly said that he had thought of it himself. The guy decided that he couldn't stop there, but that didn't mean he had to make Liz cry. The main character raised his head and said that they would act according to the traditional strategy of finding friends. The girl lit up when she heard this and said that the impossible would become possible with friends. The guy said that if you take the example that it would be easier to fight the enemy in this case, and they can also distribute things. This way he can come home earlier and Liz won't scold him, and the travel radius will be longer. Klaus also added that he is a loner and this method does not suit him. Liz covered her mouth and told him to stop without making her cry in the morning. It was for this reason that the guy rented a loaded donkey. Now he will definitely pay and most of his current worries will go away, so he will have enough of such a companion. After that, the guy quickly began to jump on the cart and shouted that his goal today was to capture 3 places. Liz was surprised and couldn't believe it. The boy sat down and spurred his donkey, shouting to the animal to rush to the nearest sparsely populated field, and they would conquer it together. The guy was glad because the plan seemed like a genius. Liz stayed where she was and shouted after her brother that 3 places was too many, and even she understood that. Her brother no longer heard her and drove his donkey forward. Meanwhile, the guild workers who were standing behind the counter were in a drooping mood. They were bothered by the fact that this strange guy appeared on the horizon. One of the girls smiled nervously and turned to the other, asking her if Klaus really took everything, took all the quests they had. Senpai replied that this was indeed the case. Yesterday, Klaus only bought the Misty Forest quest, but today he bought the Poisonous Swamp, the Evening Mine, and the Valley of Sorrow. The first girl turned around and with a crazy look said that he couldn't go through everything in one day. Usually such a number of quests are taken by a group of several people and not for one day. Someone laughed and said that the guy had rented a donkey just for today. The second girl who was sitting next to him said with a slight tremor in her voice that the guy would go through everything in a few hours. But Taryn just smiled and said that the others were too worried. The girl added that this guy is really strange, but you definitely can't cope with so many. One of the girls with dark hair said that lately the guy has been working a real miracle. Taryn said that if he made the impossible this time, they would look again. After that, Taryn smiled even more menacingly and said that then they would force him to take action, even if the guy got into incredible trouble. One of the girls shouted about the cash register. At this time, a certain adventurer was standing in a pink cape with a hood, who witnessed the girl's conversation about Klaus. She was really alarmed by this. The girl couldn't believe what she had just heard. She turned around slightly, holding her weapon, and quietly asked if Klaus was really a loner. At this time, the guild was bustling with life, as always. A large number of people liked to gather at the guild bar, which was also a dining room. Even here, rumors about Klaus began to spread. The three men were arguing about the fact that the kid was able to anger Terran again. One of them began to get indignant, saying that he would not let anyone offend his terrain. The other two just laughed, talking about when the girl managed to become his. The girl in the pink hood was also sitting at one of the tables and snacking on an ordered salad of fresh vegetables and rice. She also had thoughts about Klaus in her head. She kept saying that the guy began to be called Klaus the Loner in the guild. This young man was able to become famous as an experienced adventurer of the lowest rank. Soon, the girl stamped her foot and turned to those men at the next table. She told them that they were having a rather interesting conversation. The men did not understand such treatment. One of the big men raised his voice and addressed the traveler, asking what he needed in a rather rude manner. The girl raised her hand and, snapping her finger, asked the bartender to pour her the same thing that men drink. After that, she got up, moved her staff, leaning on the table, and then the knock itself, at which she was sitting, began to move to the neighbors. The girl asked her to tell her the details too. The girl was also, like Klaus, an adventurer of a lower rank. The girl smiled and immediately introduced herself to the new company, saying that her name was Marim, and she wanted to learn more about the subject of their conversation. Marim was most likely not from these parts, because she singled out Klaus as a local star. The man with the beard laughed after a short pause. After that, he threw one leg over the other, picked up a mug from the table, and asked if the girl really wanted to listen to this strange guy. Marim was surprised when she heard that he was considered strange here. At the same time as the conversation in the guild was going on, the main character was already standing at a small crossroads where there was also a small stop for tourist carriages. The guy dismounted and headed towards the board, on which various ads were periodically placed, and there was also a map of the area where you could find out about the locations. Klaus smiled when he saw one of the tour wagons. The main character thought that they helped him too, because it was a very convenient thing for a novice adventurer. It could also help to move around the neighboring hunting grounds, saving time and effort. But Klaus also understood that today his events would turn out very differently, because he is his own transport. Klaus turned to his, for today, cargo donkey, and rejoiced at him. The guy said he would trust the animal and urged the donkey to get along well. The rented donkey was named Hanako. He continued to stand at the bus stop and drink water. After the main character's appeal, the beast threw back its muzzle and began to laugh loudly. After that, the donkey turned to the main character and bared his teeth, trying to show them. It could have passed for a smile, of course, but it was unlikely that the donkey understood Klaus. Meanwhile, someone was standing and watching from behind a tree. It was already a familiar character for the main character, the dark elf Tiela, who was conducting surveillance. The girl was outraged, thinking that the guy was standing and talking to himself. Turning back, she leaned against a tree, thinking that she hadn't deserved this since early in the morning. She also didn't understand why it was an ass, because the guy had only recently talked about productivity. The girl thought that even a horse would be several times faster than a donkey. The speed of a running person will be approximately equal to the speed at which a donkey harnessed to a cart moves. Tiela sighed, and then thought again that it so happens that the guy chose the donkey because of the price. That's why Tiela didn't like adventurers who were obsessed with saving money. Tiela stared in surprise when she heard the main character turn to the donkey and shout for Hanako to activate the automatic movement function. Meanwhile, the guy got on the cart and took a whip, which he began to slap the donkey, hurrying him along. Klaus's first plan was to visit the poisonous swamps. The donkey sped off at an incredible speed, quickly leaving everything behind him. Klaus continued to stand and hold on to the reins, trying not to fall off the cart. Tiela ran out from behind a tree and was in complete shock. The girl did not even understand what had happened, because the cart with Hanako's donkey and Klaus was already at the end of the far hill. Realizing that the dark elf was now far behind, the girl rushed to run, shouting into the void to be waited for. The girl arrived at the first sign, which informed travelers that there would be a poisonous swamp ahead. The distance on horseback is 2.5 hours. despite the fact that the weather will be good. While Tiela continued to wonder what kind of frenzied and unprecedented donkey speed was demonstrated by Klaus's companion, the guy had an automatic movement timer running. The timer value was getting smaller and smaller, approaching 0. At the same time, the main character was sitting with his eyes closed and waiting for the automatic movement function to end. Gradually opening his eyes, the guy saw that he had finally reached the poisonous swamps. There was a sign in front of him, on which skulls were painted, warning of danger. And ahead, the road stretched for several more meters, ending in the middle of the marshes. Klaus stood up again, looking around the craters of the wonderful location. The main character grinned, once again realizing that he just blinked and was already where he needed to be. The sign said that there was a poison zone ahead. You need to have several antidotes with you. Such instructions were given by a small guide. Looking down, the guy thought that, judging by the shadow from the sun that he sees below, Klaus still can't understand anything. The required time is 1 hour and 20 minutes. Klaus smiled and did not stop being pleased with himself, because he really could not believe that he would be able to use transport together with the skill. Due to this, of course, it turned out to get there quickly. It was one of the new brilliant ideas that came up this morning. The movement speed with the automatic function was very high. The guy was able to understand this when he first returned from the misty forest. It took an hour to walk to the city, but when using automatic return, it took only 35 minutes. Klaus remembered well how he had once competed with the Royal Knights. Then it wanted to compare which was faster, his automatic function or the affectation of that guy. The main character always laughed kindly, saying that he was pleased to take on such challenges. The result of the race was almost always the same. The guy was almost 15 minutes ahead of the opponent and started. In his first race, the victory was indeed with a gap of more than 15 minutes, even though he was still a child. Klaus remembered with a smile that he had managed to drop by home even then, but it was all set up like a scam. That's exactly what the knights accused him of, after they crossed the starting line sweaty and tired. Then, the same knight told the main character that the boy should not confuse courage with recklessness. He also added that a human is a creature that runs with its feet, trying to escape. The knight screamed in panic that he was only a biped. If there was a competition just for ordinary people, then he would have won for sure. Klaus thought then that he had done something. He felt like he was running across the rooftops. The match itself was cancelled, as the opponent referred to feeling unwell and refused a rematch, because he had no strength left for anything. However, even if he was unwell, the fact should remain the same. Klaus won. At that time, the guy was at the first rank, and there was no way the knight could be weaker than him. The main character clenched his 2 hands into fists and said that he could be completely sure. Although it was just moving then, if you use it together with transport, then the speed also increases. After that, Klaus thought about it and decided that he would not just drive. He thought that with a donkey, he could shorten the time by 2 times, and besides, he had never had an incident with the skill. The most important thing that the main character thought about is that he believes in himself. Even if a guy has just started learning this technique, it belongs only to him innately, so he must do it. Klaus continued to smile broadly, saying that now, of course, he doesn't quite understand everything well. Most of all, the guy was worried that he did not yet know everything about the details and nuances of the technique. In any case, the main character came to the conclusion that it is necessary to take risks, and only then there will be knowledge and success. He blindfolded the donkey, which continued to scream. Tiela caught up with them and saw Klaus adjusting his donkey's eye patch. The girl was shocked by such approaches to the movement of the traveler. Bending down to the ground, the girl saw the path, and then said that her initial assumption was correct. The main character decided to use a shortcut, because the tracks led exactly there. But everything was still very strange. After all, there were so few shortcuts in the swamp that when she saw this one, the girl called Klaus a fool. Not the time. What did he choose in the end? The girl saw a ladder made of wood ahead and imagined that the guy was climbing over it, bouncing a cart on a tree. The tracks were right there, and it wasn't clear how he did it. While Klaus continued his travels in the poisonous swamps, the conversation about him in the guild continued. Harem, who was hooked on men, began to learn more about the guy. The first thing the girl asked was about the strangeness of the guy, because she wanted to know what it was. Well, Harem also wanted to know if Klaus, a loner, was really that dangerous. The man with the beard lifted his mug off the table again and said with a laugh that once in his memory there was an incident a few years ago. The man said that Klaus showed his abilities when he competed with one of the royal knights in Bara. The girl asked again about the competition, but the men said it was just for testing. After that, the bearded man said that, by the way, he won then and with a colossal difference of 15 minutes. After all, the race was with a physically prepared opponent, so the boy's victory seemed strange, and the shortcut he took was unruffled. The girl guessed that he had taken a shortcut, but the man immediately said that Klaus had crossed the aqueduct in the northern part of the city and made a big detour. Miriam couldn't believe that the guy had jumped off the bridge straight down. She believed that this was an absolutely unsafe height, but the man also said that the boy really jumped, and without a bit of doubt. After the big adventurer said that the most interesting thing starts here. That very day, he happened to be in that place by accident and saw something. He said that there was actually something like a pile of garbage at the bottom of the bridge, which the guy used as a pillow. But besides the pile, there was a dilapidated wall that blocked the way. The boy then jumped down, turned over in the air, jumped through a narrow window destroyed from above and landed on a board, which served as a springboard. Miriam asked again in disbelief. The man said that even he, who saw everything with his own eyes, did not understand anything. It's just that the window from above that Klaus jumped through is the size of a man, and it's narrow and cramped. The guy had such a crazy calculation, because he really did not think for a second and did not doubt himself, but just jumped. The man finished the last one and said that he had never seen such strange people. Miriam, without saying many words, started to get up from her seat. The girl opened her purse and put something rattling on the table. It was 2 gold coins. The man, in gratitude for the beer and a small contribution, told her that he advises the girl not to get close to Klaus. Miriam thanked me and said that it was useful to hear all this. The girl began to walk away, pulling up her cloak a little. She smiled and, walking away, said that, unfortunately, she had business with Klaus. The men looked after her uncomprehendingly. The one who told her the story asked Miriam if she would really go to a meeting with him. The girl replied that it was so. After that, he said that payment for the information should now follow. The girl abruptly turned on the revelers and shouted that she did not understand what he was talking about. The adventurers remembered her offer to repeat their drinks, and they took advantage of it. At the same time, near the poisonous swamp, Klaus was already starting to sort out the things that he had managed to collect while at this location. Tyrella, who finally caught up with the guy, saw what he was doing and stood shocked, continuing to hide. Her mouth opened in surprise and her eyes almost fell out. The entire carriage that Klaus rode was covered with various papers that he had taken from the guild itself. These were all the quests for this location, where he is staying now. Klaus was standing in front of a small piece of cloth, which he laid under all the collected resources. At the age of 18, Klaus has already been able to rise to 41 levels. This task quickly added a couple more levels to him from above. The following things were announced in the list of what needed to be done. Defeat frogs and slugs, 10 pieces to collect caustic and burning water and 5 bottles. Klaus stood proudly and declared that he had collected everything and the quest was completed. The guy loaded everything onto his cart and was glad that he had everything fit, while he said that his cart was very compact. He also hummed a song to himself. Nearby, Tiella was watching all this, horrified by the guy's speed and skill. She held her hand near her chest and mentally asked what it was like just now. The girl understood, looking at the loading, that all this was strange. This is the first time she's seen this. She was angry, arguing that she was only an hour late. She did not understand how he managed to complete this quest in just 30 minutes. Tiella continued to get angry, clearly realizing that something was wrong with this guy. At this rate, she would chase him all day, never understanding how he managed to pull it all off. If things continue like this, she will again have to tell her sister that she has 0 information. Meanwhile, Klaus has already watched the quest that will take place next. The girl heard that the next stop where the guy is going is the evening mine. Because of the load, the guy's speed, of course, may drop a little. But all this time, he will be faster than an elf on foot. Tiella took out several bottles of a strong recovery potion and started drinking one after the other. After drinking a couple of bottles, she threw them and broke them, preparing to set off again. The girl rushed after the cart, thinking that she should not be underestimated. Klaus shouted again for his automatic movement skill to be activated. 6 hours later, the girl was already standing on the ledge of a stone elevation and met Klaus's cart, which was entering the valley. The guy drove slowly and quite steadily. The guy was studying a quest that he now has to complete here. The girl said that Klaus was late and she was already waiting for him here. Tiela was extremely pleased with herself and the plan that came to her mind. Even Klaus couldn't arrive faster than her and didn't even notice that she had passed one point, immediately going to the Valley of Sorrow. The girl understood that she would not be able to get there faster by her own efforts. But was all this, she had provided for many things. Also, the girl begins to remember her path, where she rested every half hour. And yet she's already here. Remembering how the girl was going to give up several times, she stopped herself, shouting that she was ready for absolutely anything for the sake of the task. Because she was an average-ranked adventurer, she was watching him from behind the trees in various signs. He communicated with his donkey and asked him to move faster. Tiela was grinning and begging him not to disappoint her. The guy was encouraging his donkey, gradually approaching the last point of the tasks for today. Tiela prepared to watch, saying, now she's going to show him her real skills. There was a sign in front of them again, which warned the adventurers that there was a dangerous area ahead of them. There was 1 kilometer left to the valley, and the entrance was forbidden to those who did not have gas masks. The girl did not understand what Klaus was standing there waiting for. The guy thought that he should at least sometimes hold the reins himself. He was surprised that it was here. Tiela couldn't figure out which it the guy was talking about. The guy said that first he would activate the automatic resource collection and clicked on the menu. From the outside, it looked like he had fallen asleep, but because the guy ran somewhere, getting the necessary tools for mining. His eyes were closed and his hands were still working. He almost noticed Tiela, who was very scared. The main character continued to break the rock with a pickaxe. The girl looked at it with her hand over her mouth, so as not to accidentally scream in surprise. The guy was a few meters away from her. The girl thought that he had just been downstairs, and now it turns out that an adventurer of a lower rank was able to run behind her. Tiela couldn't figure out if the guy's rank was really as a lowly adventurer or if there was a mistake. Soon after several blows, the slab began to fall apart. The guy made a couple more careful strokes, after which he carefully began to take out a certain glowing fruit. Looking closer, the girl saw that the guy was taking out a new quality mandrake root. Tiela prepared to cover her ears with a terrible scream. Mandrake is a plant. If pulled out of the ground, it will raise a scream that is fatal to those who hear it. The range was as much as 8 meters. Tiela thought that the existence of such inferior adventurers was impossible, and she wept bitterly. The girl remained lying in the Valley of Sorrow and her health level was very low. Apparently, she could have spent all the potions, but Klaus didn't know she was there and was already leaving. By the time Klaus returned to the guild, it was already getting dark. In the guild building, Taryn approached and addressed the leader, who was holding several sheets in her hands. The woman was completely immersed in their study. These were the profiles of the adventurers of the lower-level guild. Taryn also said that it was already time for the exam to become an adventurer of the middle rank. The leader said that she was very interested in what he would do. Taryn asked again at first and then immediately realized who she was talking about. After that, the girl smiled furtively. Taryn said that, in her opinion, the guy has sufficient abilities to pass successfully. The only problem was that the guy was acting alone all the time, which could also play against him in the trial. The leader continued to flip through the reports and said that with all this, she could no longer leave him in a low rank, because the guy did not correspond to this much. The guildmaster added that the work he had done in a week would not have been able to complete even the highest rank. Taryn said she might have to use force, but the guy has to pass the exam. The leader also said that a certain Charlotte, who has a recommendation from the Class A group, is also applying for the exam, although this should not be a serious problem. The master began to say that he and several other people were in this group. Taryn said she understood and would accept the recommendation. After that, the girl said that Charlotte would have an exam next week. At that time, an unknown guy was standing with his back to another house. He turned to another person and said that he understood everything and the interlocutor could go. He was a member of the Class A Special Bond Group. A certain guy chuckled, saying that he had not been there for a very long time. The guy was looking at an old photo, where Klaus was also there. The guy was deleted from there a long time ago. and the man holding the picture said that most likely the boy was still spinning in the lower rows. It was Cash, the leader of that very group. The guy laughed and, remembering the boy, said that Klaus was the weakest of their strongest class. A group. Meanwhile, Klaus continued to drive towards the city under the cover of night, rejoicing that for 2 mandrakes he would receive 64 gold coins, not to mention everything else. Mirim also wandered the streets of the city, crying and cursing Klaus. The girl said that she would find him and take revenge. Because she didn't have a single coin because of him right now. Liz, Klaus's younger sister, was home alone and was thinking about what to cook for her. This time, the girl was developing one of her new recipes, and the diagnostic skill often helped her. The girl looked at a small vat and after studying it realized that there was sauerkraut, that is, cabbage cooked with sourdough. It always comes out sour and delicious, so it was a good option. Liz twirled a small cup of spices and said with a smile that using a hot comb always gives cabbage a good accent, and that's how her brother Klaus likes it. The girl was waving her small forceps and singing something when she suddenly turned to her brother. She asked if that was what he thought Liz had just said. Slightly changing her voice, Liz answered her own question by agreeing. The girl also added that she would make an excellent daughter-in-law. Her brother was a doll that she made herself. The girl continued to say in Klaus's voice that it was not necessary to marry so early, because at such an early age, it was too dangerous. The girl then added that she would then spend her whole life with her brother. The doll was made quite uncomplicated. The towel had to be rolled up, folded in half and tied, and you can take a ponytail and an eggplant as hair. Liz got all worked up and started dancing with her brother's doll, also talking to her. She was very glad that she had a brother like Klaus. The girl continued to hum that her father was a knight and was friends with Klaus's father. After his death, Klaus's father sheltered Liz in the Noldor family. Klaus's father was an adventurer who went missing. There were suggestions that his father had already died. Klaus's mother could not bear a series of such events and ended up in the hospital. Suddenly, the girl waved and knocked the doll off the spot. At the same time, Klaus himself stopped at another camp for travelers. His donkey began to drink water, and Klaus took out the lunch he had prepared earlier. Liz decided to arrange an impromptu meeting of the Noldor family. There was a spoon, a mug, a pepper shaker, and a brother himself, made of a towel and an eggplant. The girl, clasping her hands together, firmly announced the beginning of the meeting. The spoon, as it turned out, was the family's vassal and the Minister of Finance. A button, rice, and a bow were also added to it. The peppermint is the Minister of Internal Affairs. A leaf, rice, cloth, and a brooch were added to it. The special guest was the brother, or rather his doll. The girl put everyone in their places and loudly announced that they had a question worth raising at the meeting. And this is the dinner menu. She looked at the other participants carefully. She was sitting on a chair, and everyone else was on the table. It felt like they were listening to her very attentively and looking at her. Liz also said that the guy took 3 whole quests. She looked around at the guests and said that they knew perfectly well how Klaus was trying his best right now. It was for this reason that she gathered everyone, because she believes that it is impossible to allow there to be any ordinary dinner there today. Now Liz is ready to listen to the options. Spoon, who was directly the Minister of Finance, said in Liz's voice that the family's economy was booming, so he thought steak would be best. The Minister of the Interior, Mr. Pepper, said that he had a different opinion. He decided that only luxuriously cooked fish would be suitable here, which would be able to please Klaus. Drawing attention to the final participant of the meeting, the Klaus doll, the girl thought that if she put her love into the food, then her brother would accept it in any form. Immediately, Liz began to feel embarrassed, pressing her hands to her face. She also remembered that her brother usually always praises the taste of the food that the girl prepares for Klaus. The girl thought that investing her love was quite natural. Then you should have chosen something basic. But in that case, what should you choose to decorate in a festive way? Liz stared straight ahead, trying to compose herself. Suddenly, a voice sounded in her head, addressing the commander and demanding action. The girl looked to the chair opposite. It was her favorite spoon that was in the pot. The spoon served as a colonel general at the table. The colonel general allegedly suggested that Klaus enjoys food only when in a good mood, which, apparently, the girl completely forgot and did not take into account. Liz also had thoughts in her head that threw her back on an incident that happened 3 years ago. This began to upset the girl and confuse her. The girl said to herself that it was hard to forget. It was evening, and the weather was terrible outside. It was raining. Liz returned home with a small grocery bag. Liz gradually began to undress and turn on the lights in the house. Klaus was sitting in the middle of the room, his face buried in the table and not making a single sound. That day, Lisa said that her brother should be somewhere else right now, but she didn't have time to finish where. Klaus immediately said succinctly that he had quit. The girl couldn't believe what she was hearing. She asked again, clarifying if the guy was referring to Gein's band. He was so happy when he joined them. About a month ago, before this period, the picture was radically different. A well-fed Klaus shouted that everything was very tasty. He also said that the food at Gein's mansion is delicious too, but it will never compare to this one. The girl brewed tea and put it on the table, pushing it towards her brother. She also began to sit down next to me and began to find out about the mansion. Liz thought that Klaus's training was taking place there now. 2:48, to which he replied positively, remembering about it. He suddenly thought about it, and then Klaus started talking about how this mansion is an ordinary, run-down estate below average. The guy also added that their floors are made of glass. Liz said it was cool and it would take years to clean up a mansion like this. The sister, overwhelmed with excitement and interest, began to ask about what to do inside the Klaus mansion. She thought he could participate in the demonstrations. The main character closed his eyes, lowered his head a little, and grinned. Klaus began to recall his training sessions with the rest of the squad. Everything was quite difficult for him, and he could not succeed for a long time. But in addition to practical and physical classes with teachers, the guys also studied the anatomy of monsters, as well as a bunch of different plants and structures of maps and dungeons. The guy remembered all this with tears in his eyes. He continued to list the endless number of classes and lessons that he was taught. After that, the guy blew up and started talking about the fact that his teachers were adventurers of the highest rank in knights. He had grueling workouts every day, every day. Liz began to urge the guy to stop in his memories. After that, the guy said that the demonstration was only once, and in the first fight he lost to Gein in less than a second. After that, the guy smiled, remembering what happened next. Gein came over and held out his hand, towering proudly over the boy. Liz crouched, waiting for the denouement. Gein then grinned and told Klaus to get up from the ground. The guy continued to mock, learning about how long the guy would be lying here. The main character raised his head and, looking at Gein, called him by name. The latter continued, holding his hand over the guy. He said they were special and had no equal. Klaus stood up with a small, respectful bow and said that, even so, he was still far behind Gein. The latter said that the guy thinks in vain that he is not capable of anything more. The young man added that Klaus is still on the first level, and they will raise him soon. After that, Gein said that there are enough magic stones here, so the guy can stand up again, spread his wings wide, and become like a bird that wants to reach the sky. That day, Klaus looked at his friend with admiration. Gein pointed a finger at himself and said it was time for them to take over this country. The country that belongs to them. Klaus finally started to smile, hearing such an inspiring speech. The guy gave Gein his hand and started to get up, hearing the continuing support from the guy. Liz frowned a little and lowered her eyes, saying softly that this was exactly what her brother was like before all this happened at Gale's mansion. All the key events took place just 20 days after Klaus entered into a special bond. It was autumn, so the weather was disgusting every day. Liz was sitting on a chair and embroidering small portraits. Soon, the door banged behind her and Klaus's voice rang out, saying that he had returned home. His sister then joyfully ran to meet him, and Klaus was standing on the threshold, who had obviously been beaten by someone. The guy was smiling at the same time and intricately scratching his head. She immediately asked about the guy's cheek. Klaus said with a laugh that he just fell down. Liz took the scissors and pointed them at her brother like a magnifying glass. The sister immediately took out all the necessary medicines that could help, and then began to question her brother further. Liz said he had obviously lied to her, because her eyes couldn't be fooled. The girl started screaming, continuing to point the scissors. She said it was clear to a fool that a human hand was involved. Or rather, it would be more accurate to say that it is not a hand, but a fist. Klaus began to object after hearing such details. Liz said that she sees similar marks on their neighbor's husband every time he cheats on his wife, for which he immediately receives. After that, they calmed down a little, and Klaus said that it wasn't exactly like a fight. It was just that he and Gain had a little misunderstanding, during which it turned out that way. The case took place in the house of the Rank A group Special Connection. Gain closed his eyes, wiping the weapon, and said that it did not match at all. The latter abstracted himself, cleaning his weapons, while everyone else was having lunch and having fun. The man who was with Klaus at the counter said he didn't match. Klaus immediately asked what they were talking about. The man said that he was talking about Geen and the guild's mid-rank exam. Geen said that the essence of the task is to collect items for the guild within a certain time. He believes that the guild treats them like newcomers, even though they are the chosen ones. The man behind the counter, tearing off his glass, said that Geen, apparently, had come up with something interesting, since he started talking about it. It was Glenn Boghead. He also said that they were listening to Geen, which was why he liked him. Afterwards, he said that he hates poor people who seem to him to be mediocre. His ability, changing atoms, unique. It was immediately supported by Chiel Carmaine. The girl said that, of course, they would pass this test. That's exactly why they have to make their debut more effective. She thought the guys had a great idea. Chiel also added that they could show that they need to be honored with the title of the highest rank, not average. Misaki Saragi, also a member of the team, added that she agrees, because it's always nice when they pay more attention than others. She also said that they could go to the exam for the higher ones. The girl also turned around and asked Klaus about her lemonade. Her ability, the gift of life, unique. Geen said their exit would be great. He managed the time, said that they would suddenly appear in the square and sow real chaos. After that, they will destroy all the monsters and show themselves as heroes in front of others. In his joy, he raised his arms up and spread them out to the sides. Other people were shocked when they heard his plan. The test will be guarded by experienced teachers, Fighter Rain and Combat Commander Abel. Glenn asked for details and Geen said that Abel had recently caught a rock lizard. Chael said in surprise that she understood everything. The girl said that in that case they could take advantage of it. Monsters born in dungeons usually don't try to get out of them, but there are exceptions. Klaus jumped up from his seat, and while everyone was shouting that this was a great idea, lifting them up, the boy thought it was all a joke. He immediately said this, specifying that the guys were overreacting. After his words, everyone froze abruptly and fell silent. At the same moment, Geen said Klaus's name. The boy, suspecting nothing, asked with a smile what he meant. Geen squeezed his hand, activated his skill, and rushed towards him. Geen punched him in the cheek with his fist. Klaus couldn't even have expected this. The main character flew away from the blow for some distance, taking down part of the chairs near the bar. Stopping time on the first level made it possible to shorten or increase the time elapsed. It was stopping that was the first level of the management skill. Klaus fell to the floor, saying he was more scared. Geen said at that moment that it was a joke. Afterwards, he asked how Klaus was feeling. Geen said that the guy suddenly flew several meters away. He asked again about the fact that it really was he who flew away. Geen himself asked him about his ill health. After that, he opened the doors and took the guy out, asking Rain to take him home. While Geen was leaving the room, the main character stretched out his hand to him and tried to call out his name several times, but he did not react in any way. Klaus was taken outside. He fell to his knees in front of the mansion and continued to call for Gain. It was 10 days before he left her. Liz said that since then, her brother has never smiled. He considered these guys his comrades until Gale did this act. Klaus later said that the path he chose was accompanied by luck, because it was on this occasion that he received a unique skill. But this luck also easily left him. After that, the main character told his sister that he wanted to try as hard as possible because it was not for nothing that he was given this unique skill. Klaus was sitting on a chair and looking out the window. Liz turned her face to him and looked at him excitedly. The girl closed her eyes and blushed. After that, she abruptly made a decision about what she would be doing on Udding today. Liz said that her brother always tries to give his best, even if he leaves his group and moves alone. The girl leaned on the table and said that she might not be able to do something, but this is not a reason to give up. She decided that she would always support her brother with her dishes, so that he would not give up. Liz shouted at all the helpers who were in the kitchen, calling out to her team to get the best dinner ingredients they could at home. All the assistants were sitting on the table, and after her words, their eyes sparkled sharply with anticipation. The girl also thought that she could offer herself as the best and hottest dinner. She immediately froze at this and cut off the thought, thinking that such a thing was not appropriate at all. After that, the girl began to scream, turning to the kitchen appliances and asking where they got such thoughts. After that, she said that there was nothing good about it because it was too early. Voices began to multiply in her head and say that the time would come, and then she thought that the exam for changing the rank would soon come. But she tried to stop herself. The voices in her head kept talking about her brother and his participation in the exam, which she once again checked herself. After that, the girl shouted loudly, urging everyone to be quiet. She said she wasn't like that, but the girl really adored her older brother, and her cooking battle continued. Soon, the following conversation took place at the Gane mansion. Glenn stumbled out onto the street, where he found the leader of his group. The guy told Geen that at the clan meeting they announced about Klaus's participation in the exam. Geen smiled and said that he had heard about it. The guy also added that Klaus managed to get sponsorship and a recommendation from the guild. Afterwards, Geen smiled and said that he immediately remembers that boring exam. Glenn said that it was because the loser Klaus was saved then. That's why he was accepted as expected. Geen said with a smile that it was not good enough, since their new guy would also participate in it. That's why he was going to have a lot of fun and make it hot. Taryn turned to the guy and said that he really collected all the items and also completed 3 quests in one day. Even in the worst case, at least 15 people would have been able to do this job. She grabbed the guy by his clothes and said that since that was the case, he was definitely dead now. After that, she quickly corrected herself, saying that they should take action. But Klaus was scared by what he heard for the first time. A strong shout was heard from the guild. A girl named Taryn was asked to go to the 3rd reception room. Klaus didn't know if he had really done something wrong again. In the 3rd reception room, there was already an application for passing the exam for the middle time from Klaus on the table. A special recommendation from the guild was also attached. The boy was sitting at a table with 2 cups of hot tea and reading. It said that the application was issued in his name as a novice adventurer, and he was also recommended by his guild. Taryn smiled broadly, folding her hands on her skirt. She solemnly announced that she was congratulating Klaus. This is given to him as a sign that the guild has appreciated his strength. The girl also said that his work had been carefully evaluated over the past week. The guild has made a special decision that the guy should be nominated for the test, so they wish him success in the exam. Klaus nervously rubbed his face and at first began to ask again, but the girl immediately gave him an answer. She repeated that his efforts were appreciated, and the guild decided to recommend that he be sent for the exam. Klaus continued to sit and study the paper carefully, repeating what he had written about his efforts and recommendations. At first, he couldn't even believe it, but after that, he jumped up from his seat with happiness. While Taryn was sitting holding her fan in her hands, the guy was jumping around the table, shouting that he had been noticed. The guy was very happy that the guild had sent his message directly to the clan. The girl asked Klaus not to make any noise in the guild building. After that, she said that the guy obviously tried not in vain, because it had been 3 years since she became the manager. All this time, the girl just couldn't ignore the growth that the guy had gone through. He's definitely not a weak link adventurer anymore because he tried harder than everyone else. After that, the girl tensed up a little and quietly asked the laughing young man. Taryn wanted to know how much Klaus himself thought she had been worried about him all these 3 years. The girl then said threateningly that she had repeatedly told Klaus not to mess with higher-ranking monsters, but he continued to poke his nose where the poison was most prevalent. After that, the guy actually took 3 whole quests, which finished off her patience. Klaus tried to stop the girl, saying that he thought he would be praised today, but Taryn herself switched to scolding. She curved her lips into a tight smile and sarcastically said that there really was no reason to scold Klaus. The last week was spinning in her head and she was bursting with rage. Suddenly, the door handle clicked. Frightened, Klaus turned in her direction and noticed that the door was closed from the outside. Taryn started talking, noticing that the guy always loses his head when he starts to do something. Taryn kept picking up the pace, saying that collecting resources, of course, is one of the most important criteria, but the guy has absolutely no concept of measure in his head. The girl at this moment had a sinister aura. She said that it was as if he wanted to ruin himself, and was ready to do anything for the sake of quests. Taryn added that if he returns late, he should be called and warned. The guild senpai was going to brainwash the guy tightly so that he would make adjustments to his behavior. The whole tirade continued until the morning, until the sun began to rise. A few days later, the fateful moment came when it was necessary to take the exam to increase the rank of an adventurer. Klaus was collected because he had been waiting for this for 3 years. He stood with a determined look and announced that he had finally arrived at the place of the exam. There were a lot of people inside who also came to take the exam. Everyone was walking and chatting, creating a buzz. Taryn shouted that she would call by numbers and give out tasks in the order of the queue. Someone abruptly clung to the guy, saying that they had finally found him. An unfamiliar female voice asked if the guy was really a single Klaus. The girl also said that the guy, which was obvious, should be surprised because she knows him. The answer was simple. The girl showed her face and said that she was also a loner. The girl, with a big smile on her face, called herself Mary. Marim said that she had a great idea and offered to pair up. While Marim was crucifying herself in front of the boy, Klaus pushed his paper forward and turned away. The girl started hitting the guy, telling him not to dare ignore her. Taryn asked for silence in the hall. After that, Taryn made an emphasis, telling Klaus the loner to show tolerance, because he is not alone here. Klaus grinned, whispering softly that he could feel the icy note in her voice. Marim continued to try to persuade Klaus, saying that they were both single and could be together. Klaus replied that she should get rid of him, and in general the guy did not understand the reason why he was the one. The girl told Klaus in the back that if she told him the big picture, it would be too long a conversation, so she could explain everything in one word, and said that it was intuition. Klaus confidently thought that he had got a serious chance. 3 years after he left Gein's band, he won't let go of this opportunity that he's about to have. After a short pause, Taryn began to speak. Everyone was listening intently to the girl, and she said that she was calling number 32, Charlotte from the group Special Connection. Klaus was stunned when he heard this. Firstly, there will be his band from which the guy left. And secondly, they almost immediately found a replacement for him then. Klaus asked softly, trying to deny what Taryn had just said. Marim went back with her explanations, saying that the Special Connection is a well-known group because they rose to A grade 3 years ago. But Klaus himself was more interested in the reason why they were here. Marim added that she had heard that all the participants had unique skills. Taryn repeated the participant's number, and then started asking if Charlotte was in the gym right now. The girl also added that if a member of the Class A group does not come out, they will disqualify her. Gein appeared in the hall, who said with a grin that they were here. The guy asked Taryn not to rush like that when she makes such statements. Gein stood on the very threshold, dressed completely in his ammunition. His armor shone and everyone began to turn around at the guy, but not Klaus, who did not want to see this man. Klaus gritted his teeth, fighting the internal stress. Gein confidently began to walk forward, talking aloud about how long he had been here, 2 or even 3 years ago. Gein was walking forward to Taryn and noticed his former teammate. He turned to Klaus with a sneaky smile, saying his name in a drawl, telling the guy that he was still here. Klaus stood there and was angry. But Gein, looking at the boy, said that it was for this reason that it was necessary to expel this worthless Klaus, and in such a way that it was at his own request. Klaus, passing by the room once again, 3 years ago, heard Gein telling the rest of the team about how much longer they would keep this incompetent friend. The guy said he needed to be kicked out a long time ago. Rubbing his sword to a shine in which you can see your reflection, the guy referred that he had heard the same words from the rest of the team. Glenn said that it is, and the guy is already at the limit. Many people thought that the guy was ruining the reputation of the whole group. The team's magician turned to Gein and said that it was the leader who was looking after him, and the guy said he would go home. It was more like a child's game. They also remembered about the last expedition where the guy behaved like a low-ranking one. It was unacceptable for a society of unique people. The girl also added at the end that if it is difficult for Gein to tell the guy about such a decision of the group, then she can do it herself. Gein said it wasn't necessary. Klaus was standing at the door and heard everything. Gein continued to examine his blade and said that this guy was the one to whom the leader personally extended his hand. If the group understands him, it sounds like they want to tell him about one thing. Gein also said that from the mouth of the team, it now looks like they are telling him, you don't know how to choose people, and Klaus was proof of that. The guy whose mansion they were all in now said that they would really leave it all like that. The guy used his skill, which immediately scared all the guys. Almost in unison, everyone began to say that this was not the case, trying to convince Geen otherwise. They kept saying that he could be sure of it. Geen, putting away his sword, said that there are many bad people in this world. And then he said that it was for this reason that they could not expel him themselves, no matter how incompetent he was. It was necessary to build everything so that the guy himself wanted to leave them. Klaus, who was still standing at the door, also heard that all this was going to happen very soon. After that, the guy added that during the next fight they would arrange an accident. After that conversation, everything developed as Geen had said. It was very unpleasant, but they really set it up, wanting to get rid of the weak in their group with all their might. That's when Klaus was left with empty pockets, embezzled his money, and made it look like it was an accident. And that day, a frustrated Klaus left the group voluntarily, as they called it. Klaus turned back to Geen and looked at him, thinking with complete contempt that if only he could then, he would have punched this scoundrel with all his might. After that, Klaus remembered the question about his being here. Gathering his courage, Klaus firmly said that this was his hometown, and that Klaus did not know what Geen could have forgotten here. After that, Klaus turned around, going to another corner to distance himself, and said, without turning around, that he had nothing to do with Geen, so he advised him to get out of here as soon as possible. Geen was amused by the words he heard. The guy added so that Klaus wouldn't be so rude. He said that they had come to escort their friend who was participating in the exam. After straightening his hair, the leader of the Special Bond group also said that absolutely any mediocre person can get the title of an average adventurer in 2 years. Geen continued to gloat, saying that they could forget the old and enjoy their meeting. After that, he spread his arms and said that Klaus finally came to the exam after 3 years. Geen's words were already beginning to cut into Klaus's ears. He just couldn't stand it all by staying away. The last thing Geen said was that he couldn't help but admire him. After that, the guy broke loose, calling out to Geen. Very quickly, Harem stood between them, who did not give free rein to Klaus's feelings and saved him from stupidity. The girl said she heard the whole conversation. After that, she said that although they were famous A-class adventurers, Klaus was her comrade, whom she would not let offend. The girl began to take up a fighting stance, shouting that she would not allow Geen to talk to her friend like that. If he continues like this, he will deal with her. Geen loudly declared, turning to the girl, that she could attack him if she wanted to. At that moment, Klaus was a little scared for the girl and realized that it was time to cool down and intervene. The guy stood clutching his hand. Klaus understood that he was preparing to use the ability and rush to marry. Geen also said that this was to be expected from the village and noisy bugs. Harem screamed that she would crush Geen herself. Klaus grabbed the girl and told her that it was their turn soon, so they should go faster because Terran would scold them. Klaus, delaying Harem, thought that Geen was very good at provoking people. He also thought that Geen was the kind of person who would easily raise his hand even against a girl if he was annoyed. Continuing to hold Harem, Klaus frowned and said that he was grateful to her. It felt like that was what she was trying to achieve, because the girl was now standing and laughing gently. When Terran called the girl's number, 33, Harem raised her hand and shouted that she was already coming. The girl also added that she and Klaus are now on the same team. Klaus didn't understand what was going on right now. Terran began to record, and the guy began to object loudly, to which the head of the guild told him to be quiet, and then announced the end of the roll call. A new member of the Class A feedback group began to approach their leader. Charlotte said they could now discuss resources. Geen said that he asked the girl not to disappear from sight. Afterwards, he said that she didn't realize the importance of her abilities at all. The girl handed over a piece of paper and said that she was called. Terran stood and shook her head, while Harem offered a choice of a task sheet. Charlotte pointed at the guy and said that this was the Klaus that the leader always called the spot of their team. Geen smiled broadly and said that was exactly what it was. He also asked the girl not to pay attention to him during the exam, because today this guy will definitely show himself. The leader, still smiling, said that they were using the girl as their team's trump card. Charlotte smiled and said that Klaus smells like something special. Then, as she was leaving, she added that he looked like even if he was being pecked, the guy would get up and move on. The girl had a feeling that the exam would not go the way Geen wanted. Geen didn't listen to the girl when she said something like that. He just grinned and said that so far, Everything is going like clockwork. The girl was completely wrong, because all his plans are coming true. Everyone rushed to the door. Klaus silently examined all the other participants, wanting to understand if he should be more afraid of something than from the others. When everyone got back to the starting line, Klaus and Marim ran forward after Terran's command to start the mid-level adventurer exam. One of the lists contained the following items: royal champignons, the lower jaw of a ghoul, cave slime liquid, small nuts, deer horn, leather keys, Salazar's replacement, and the red thread of dawn. According to the guild's terms, you could choose any 3 items from the above list, get them, and bring them back. The time limit was until tomorrow afternoon. Marim held a piece of paper in her hands and called out to Klaus. The girl told him to look at her list. They had as many as 4 items that match. The girl confidently leaned over and said that Klaus could consider that they had completed the exam. She had a matching deer horn, a thread of red dawn, and a ghoul's jaw. Klaus held the reins of his cart and was angry. The girl continued to chat about how they can't relax with all this, and it's very important for them to properly allocate all the time so that they have enough to collect all the items. Also, the girl, holding up her finger, said that she would start with a deer horn because it seemed to her that this was the most difficult task on the whole list. She also asked Klaus for his opinion. Klaus looked very gloomy. He continued to stare blankly ahead, believing that Marim was actually a very noisy kid who would not let him rest throughout the exam. After that, Klaus turned around and told Marim to be quiet already. The girl told him not to ignore her. After that, Marim gave a thumbs up and said that they were a team. Klaus said that he was already tired of all this. The guy said it was time to get it over with, and he had an idea because he had already chosen a place for himself. Marim was trying to find out what skill the guy was using by looking at the screen. Klaus apologized and said that he would go on alone, and then press the button to quickly move to the cemetery. So the automatic function of moving to the cemetery has been activated. She had a second level and, by standards, had to get the guy to his destination in an hour. His eyes began to close gradually, and he could only hear Marim thinking that the guy was falling asleep. Soon he found himself in the cemetery, where the team was recommended to enter. Klaus turned and smiled. He thought he hadn't been here for a long time, but the place hadn't changed at all. The cemetery was supposed to be inhabited by ghouls. When the guy turned around, he saw that Marim had disappeared. He said that it was great. For sure the girl fell out of the cart on the way here, because the donkey runs very fast. But Marim continued to hold on to the back of the wagon, inserting her staff into one of the holes, which helped him hold on. She heard this and shouted that Klaus was a scoundrel. Marim said he could have at least warned her about it. Klaus shouted that he had already noticed how stubborn the girl who followed him was. The cemetery had 2 levels. Only skeletons live on the upper floor. But just underground were the medium-level and high-level ghouls that Klaus knew about. Since their target was the lower jaw of the ghoul, they would not stay here for long. Marim flew and hit one skeleton after another, which surprised the guy. Klaus also continued to fight back, and the girl understood that he was not so bad. Although, if you think about it that way, it was natural, because he was also a loner, just like her. After that, Klaus stopped himself, realizing that he was not Klaus because the guy had been walking for 3 years before, and Marim went as soon as she got her skill. In the guild, achievement scores were valued higher than status. Marim turned around and asked Klaus what was the matter. The guy said that everything was fine, but Marim noticed how the guy was surprised by her talent. Klaus thought it might be a mind-reading skill. He asked where the girl was from. Marim said it was obvious because everyone she joined had such faces. The girl said that she felt a surge of admiration for Klaus. The guy thought that it was more likely the opposite. But it wasn't that simple. Because Marim was a magician. Suddenly, an army of skeletons began to appear in front of them, blocking their passage. Klaus started to slow down, but not Marim, who kept running forward. The girl started charging her staff and said that this was exactly what she needed. She would show him what she was capable of, and he would see her real strength. Her appearance became very determined, and she said that she was now solving all the skeletons. So, after Marim was about to demonstrate her strength, the girl loaded the staff and energy immediately began to ooze out of it, which headed towards Klaus. The tree, which was located away from the guy, immediately cracked loudly, and its base began to fall apart from the explosion that occurred there. After that, it began to fall down. It was good that the tree didn't start falling towards the guys. Its trunk fell on a small building of the crypt, which was located in the cemetery. The crowd of skeletons stopped, blocking the way. The tree fell on the small temple with tremendous speed. A strong noise was heard, and the building gradually began to crumble on the monsters standing below. And finally, a piece of the building collapsed on the skeletons, driving them deep into the ground from which they had climbed out. Harem began to slow down quickly and take cover from the dust that was flying in their direction. There were no monsters in their path now, but there were debris. Harem remained silent, not understanding how this happened in the first place, while Klaus shouted with all his might. After the guy with the crazy look turned to Mary, holding in his hand the bone with which he fought back earlier. He slowly rushed towards Mary. As it turned out, the beam grazed Klaus a little, singeing his hair on top of his head. Harem immediately pointed to herself and happily said that it turned out very well and asked Klaus for his opinion. He immediately rushed at her. She called him to calm down, after which she said that she had not done it on purpose. Part of the crypt remained in place, while the collapsed one lay on the enemies. Klaus was leaving the place with a quick step. The girl began to catch up with the guy, saying that she would admit her mistake and she would be more careful in the future. He was angry and shouted at Harem not to follow him. She started saying that they were friends. After that, she added that they were able to destroy more than 10 skeletons at one time and save time. Klaus said it didn't matter, because the girl had almost shortened his life. Harem chuckled, thinking of skeletons and ghouls. The girl said that these are monsters that they will destroy further, and they are all afraid of fire. She also said that she would prove herself stronger this time. Klaus clenched his hand into a fist and said that it was more likely that he would be burned alive there. After that, he thought that he was already beginning to understand why Harem was a loner. The main character defiantly coughed several times, attracting attention, and immediately turned to Mary. He continued by saying that he had a serious conversation. The girl at that time asked about what happened there. Klaus turned to her and said angrily that Harem should listen to him. Suddenly, they saw that the entrance to the dungeon had been blocked by several wars and other adventurers were waiting outside. Klaus was outraged by what he saw. Harem said they were unlikely to get there now. Suddenly, they heard a voice from the side who said that the passage was blocked urgently. It was a man with a pipe who was sitting on a large tombstone. He confirmed his words and then, pointing with his hand, said that a high-level boss had been discovered in the boss's room. After that, he also said that the people from the guild rated the danger too highly and decided to block the entrance from the subjects. Suddenly, everyone noticed something strange and turned towards the entrance. Those who blocked the entrance looked like they were guarding someone. The fog gradually disappeared. Klaus began to get angry, saying that this was a dungeon cleanup, and therefore the boss that was discovered was destroyed by someone. Harem started looking around and asked if the weather was changing at such a moment. Klaus lowered his head and said yes, if absolutely all the monsters disappear. After that, Klaus said that this also applies to their goal, so the entrance now makes no sense. The main character bared his teeth and said that he did not understand why this particular man had cleaned the crypt. A man began to come out of the dungeon. Klaus continued to look at him in a special way, not like everyone else around who was smiling at a member of the Class A Special Bond group. Harem asked if this was the man in question. Glenn appeared from the dungeon, walking with a wide smile and holding in his hand the skull of a high-ranking monster from the boss room. The girl looked at the main character in surprise. Klaus called out the name of the man coming out of the crypt. The girl asked if he knew him, to which he replied positively. The main character explained that this was 18-year-old Glenn Bogus, also a member of the group where he had previously been. Glenn noticed Klaus and turned to him, telling the guy that they had not seen each other for a long time. The latter also said that the guy hasn't changed a bit and still fits this dead and insignificant place. Klaus shouted that Glenn seemed to be lost and then asked him directly, "What is an A-rank adventurer doing here?" Klaus understood that they were trying to put a spoke in his wheels. Glenn laughed and said that Klaus was probably stupid to ask about such things. The man said that he was only helping Klaus. While Glenn was coming down, Klaus indignantly asked what the help was. Glenn said that Geen is one of the jurors for this exam, and he will keep an eye on the exam takers. After that, he pointed to the girl who was holding a skull on a tray. Glenn said that the guy was lucky because today, by pure chance, a high-level boss appeared here and the adventurer destroyed him. Glenn started laughing and said that Klaus didn't have to thank him. He also added that he doesn't even know how much Klaus would have spent his lives if it hadn't been for him. After that, Glenn laughed out loud and told the guy to get ready, because then such accidents would also happen. Therefore, the guy should try to snatch at least one item. Glenn went up to his horse and asked the girl where they were going next. Klaus shouted to Glenn what all this meant, but he was already going to the Red Mountain Stream and rode off. Klaus began to get angry, and thoughts began to flash through his head that this group had started its old business again, bullying him. Klaus wasn't going to stand for it. Mariam also didn't understand what was going on. She didn't understand what Glenn was talking about, what he was going to do, and what it all meant. Klaus said that he didn't understand himself. To be honest, Klaus said whatever it means, Glenn really pisses him off, and he's not going to let this cheeky guy ruin the exam. Klaus was so sure that Glenn could at least hurt himself. The main character thought a little about what to do. He knew that they would definitely continue to interfere with him. It was necessary to figure out how to act in this situation, so that it would be better. Grabbing his bag, the guy shouted that this was no joke. After that, he rushed in the other direction, saying that he had an interesting thought. Marim stayed where she was and watched the guy go. The guy jumped on his cart and thought that if they wanted to get ahead of him, he would do it himself. After that, the guy furiously opened the skill panel and said that he was going to use the automatic function at full power. Continuing to scroll through the panel, Klaus laughed and told him to look carefully, because he was going to show them how much he had changed. He activated the skill field. Meanwhile, another adventurer from the Special Bond group was already in place at the other dungeon, which was located near the mountainside. The case itself was deep in the Shounen Mountains. The whole field was dotted with flowers, which opened and stretched towards the bright and warm sun. Soon the weather began to change and heavy precipitation began to fall, which began to cover this beauty. It was snow that suddenly started falling in the middle of spring. The girl from the Special Connection, who was able to change the weather, stood on a stone and began to gradually use her skill, making special movements. The girl continued to concentrate for a while and soon raised her hands up. A blizzard and a snowstorm began abruptly on the street. The girl started laughing, after which she said that Klaus, apparently, was a complete fool. She watched the guy approach and added that Geen knew what the guy would do. She kept talking, urging Klaus to come to her as soon as possible and plunge into her cold embrace of the weather. Meanwhile, the weather in the forest on the ascent to the foot also worsened, and the trail was covered with snow. Angry yetis began to descend from the mountain, and the girl promised that she would freeze Klaus's body and soul. The guy rode with his eyes closed, continuing to make his way further and further. The Adventurers Guild was also in turmoil during the rank upgrade exam for novice adventurers. There was a very interesting conversation going on in the guest room. Two guards, whom Geen had posted, were also on guard. Footsteps sounded in the corridor, and the guards turned around. They heard how they were notified of their return. It was Rain and Glenn who had already completed their assignments. Glenn was in charge of subordination, and also exterminated all the bosses in this area. Rain also carried out the subjugation, also killing all the bosses there. When they entered the room, they immediately said that they had done everything as Geen had asked them. Rain also said that she had successfully completed her mission. Geen praised them, saying that they were smartly strapped. Geen, meanwhile, was bent over a map of the area that lay on the table in front of him. Glenn said it was so easy that he almost fell asleep. He asked if they were doing well, to which Geen replied positively. In front of them was a sheet with Klaus's tasks, from which they crossed out the trials that he did not get. Glenn said there wasn't much left. Geen smiled broadly and solemnly said that Klaus had nothing left. After that, he paused a little, looked at the papers again, and added that the little scoundrel had the same thing with him. Glenn noticed that a squad of hired subordinates had been ordered to have all the low-level dungeons near the city also cleared, like the areas that the Special Bond had vacated. Afterwards, going to the window, Geen also said that only high-level dungeons remain, even though it was like 2 fingers on the asphalt for them, but a stupid exam decides everything. After that, Geen again spread his arms solemnly and said that they should not allow their little friend to pass this exam. This is precisely their current goal. Glenn chuckled as he looked at his leader. He immediately said that he completely agreed with him. This year's exam was too easy, so initially there were risks that they prevented themselves. Bolgos also shared that he initially thought differently. Glenn thought that Geen was just bored, so he was doing it. The leader even stopped time to look at the task list. Geen continued to smile at the words Glenn was saying. Bogos added that their leader had invested a lot to pull this off, but Geen only said that Klaus was just a bug. Looking at something further, Geen also said that they remain special, which is why they have so many privileges. He also started talking about worthless nobles, focusing on this. Glenn laughed, saying that he was representing the grandmother who was dying of indignation. Geen also said that only the strongest have the right to life, and then added that she would be happy with such an exam. After all, they always stood out, even when they passed their exam. Glenn said he didn't care what happened to the guildmaster, and it didn't matter if she died or not, it was still fine. After that, Glenn raised his finger, sat down on an upholstered chair, and solemnly declared that only their brilliant girl, and perhaps the incompetent bug Klaus Nordal, would remain alive. Bokas also said that he had received new news. The guy had heard that Klaus was heading north now, because that was what the one who was watching them had told him. Geen asked the direction again. Rain intervened in the conversation, putting her hands behind her back. The girl assumed that Klaus was now heading towards the mountains, which are located near the eastern clouds. Geen said that this was indeed the case. This was the most remote dungeon for beginners, which is within a day trip. He added that their labors had not yet managed to get there. Nevertheless, the smile did not continue to slip from the leader's face. Geen said that these fools would not succeed, because in that area all nature is set against him. Because there is now the one who controls the weather, Chil Carman. While the special bond group was discussing their dirty deeds that they were doing in relation to Klaus's group, the guy himself was fighting a battle in a snowy mountainous area, where they were attacked by snow animals. There were quite a few of them, and at that moment it would seem good that Klaus was not left alone on his journey. They began to be herded, and Klaus and Marum huddled back to back, waiting for the attack. Quite unexpectedly, the monsters began to run away in panic in different directions. Klaus and Marum stayed where they were, watching the monkeys scatter. Snow monkeys were low-ranking monsters. They appeared only in winter, and in the warmer months they hibernated. They belonged to the class of mountain monsters, and it was hard for them to wake up when they lived in a large pack. Marum, with her hand in the air, waved her fist, shouting what was happening to nature. The girl turned far into the mountains, asking nature to come to her senses, because it's the height of summer. Klaus started swearing out loud, talking about how Geen got to him, who was able to get to him even here. Marim turned around and heard Klaus saying that it was snowing with someone's help. They were standing on a high ledge, and everything was perfectly visible. Klaus said that it was, and then pointed his hand to the side and told Marim to look there, towards the sky. A certain area was visible where the magic ended. After that, Klaus said that he knows only one person who could do such a thing and subdue the weather, Shane Carmain. Klaus also said that the girl 3 years ago was very capable. At the first level of her ability, she could predict the weather with absolute accuracy, and already at the second level, she could control it. After that, Klaus thought that no one had previously known that the girl's abilities would be able to grow so much in all this time. Maram continued to wonder. But Nordal said there was something else. The guy held his bag tightly in one hand and opened the skill panel with the other. Klaus waved his free hand, activating the automatic resource collection. As Klaus continued to look at the panel, he thought that the special bond did not know for sure that he had improved his skills. Now his automatic resource collection works in any weather, and he will be able to get nuts and apples. However, the problem was still in the cold, because the time it would take to pack was 2 hours, 55 minutes, and 18 seconds. Whether there will be enough time for everything else is anyone's guess. After that, Klaus thought for a while, and grinned. The guy thought to himself that he didn't even need to think about it. He should have just done it now. Marum stood next to him and looked at Klaus, who remained silent, thinking about something of his own. The girl asked him what Nordal was going to do. At some point, the girl took the guy by the shoulder and said that she did not understand at all what was in his head right now, but it was not worth rushing. She said they might make a mistake, which would be a sad outcome. Klaus calmly said that he completely agreed. After that, the guy added that it would be better for Mary to return, because then everything would become much more dangerous. Marum cautiously turned to Klaus. Nordal said she should do it at least for a short period of time. After that, the guy added that he had found a wonderful thing in their joint hike. Klaus said he liked it when they fought shoulder to shoulder with her. He also added rather dryly that it's nice to be with someone who can at least partially cover your back. Merrim continued to call out to Klaus, but his tone changed, and the guy ended his speech rather sternly. Klaus said that he had always been a loner and would continue to be one. After that, he shouted that Merrim would not be able to catch up with him if he used his skill, so she had to return immediately. At the end, Klaus shouted loudly, ordering his third-level automatic collection function to activate. The place where the guy was standing became a geyser of snow that flew up. Merrim managed to close her eyes and then, gradually opening her eyes one by one, the girl noticed that there was no one in the place where Klaus was standing. Merrim was left all alone in the middle of the forest, which was covered with falling snow. The girl quietly said the name of her teammate, wanting to understand where he had gone. After that, she shouted Klaus's name even louder, asking him to come back to her. But Klaus was already far away. The collection function led the guy inside a mountain cave, where he had already found something. The timer value gradually approached 0, and the guy began to open his eyes. This meant that the skill had done its job, and Klaus was returning to consciousness. The guy was standing in front of a bush where caramel apples grew, covered with a beautiful pattern. Klaus looked down and saw that he was already holding the 5 pieces he needed for the list. Klaus was delighted, saying that his first mission was finally considered completed. He began to put the apples in his bag, saying that so far, everything was going well. Now he had to think about the next step he would take. Suddenly, the guy became alert when he heard someone shouting at him and approaching, crunching snow. As it turned out, the apple bush was very close to the place where they were standing with Merrim. When the girl saw him, she immediately went to the guy. Klaus was thinking hard about what to do next. It was clear that 2 feelings were fighting in Merrim's face: fear and anger. Of course, she didn't want Klaus to leave the girl here alone, in the middle of this winter, surrounded by monsters. It was already 2 hours and 30 minutes to the next place, so Merrim would definitely get tired and would not catch up with the guy further. He shouted goodbye to Mary, wishing not to catch a cold. He only managed to hear a request to stop, but there was no need to delay. The guy immediately activated the automatic collection function as soon as his cooldown passed and the time started counting down. When Klaus woke up, he began to look around. The guy understood that the action of the skill had already ended, and he opened his eyes. But why did the guy still not see anything? The only thing Klaus felt right now was the wild cold blowing over his hands, as well as a small object that was hard to the touch. Klaus was surprised, and then realized that it was a nut. Klaus began to put the nut in his bag, and then decided to use the magic stone, which was lying somewhere in the same place, nearby. After that, the guy shouted for the light to appear. The red stone began to glow, and the guy immediately saw that he was somewhere on the street. There were several snowdrifts and a medium-sized tree around him. As soon as the guy began to rejoice, he immediately noticed that the snowdrifts around turned out to be healthy snow yetis, who woke up from the light they saw and began to growl. It was a completely unexpected turn of events. Klaus continued to stand and light up the area for himself, and the paws of the evil yetis continued to reach out to the boy with the magic stone. Merrim, meanwhile, was charging the magic charge in her staff with complete determination in her eyes. The girl intended to carry out an attack that required a lot of strength. The girl stood near the abyss, continuing to swing. On the other side stood Klaus, who saw the girl and looked at her suspiciously, thinking that he had made her very angry. Merrim screamed, trying to warn Klaus of the danger that was right behind him. It took Nordal a moment to realize that he was in trouble. The guy only managed to make a sound that reacted to Merrim's scream. Soon, the charge flew straight towards him, and Klaus began to back away to dodge. Crouching down to the ground as much as possible and continuing to move, Klaus saw that Merrim's ball was flying at the monsters standing a step away from the boy. Nordal did not yet understand how to get out. A huge clot of magic that escaped from the girl's staff hit directly into the chest of one of the yetis, who was in the center. Klaus covered his face and began to fall into the snow. Merrim was still on the other side of her friend. The girl screamed at the monsters to pay attention to her and leave Klaus. Klaus looked at everything with dumbfounded eyes. The girl continued to scream, saying that she could not afford to put her travel companion in the clutches. One of the yetis began to growl. His battle cry was simply deafening. And after that, the monsters rushed towards Merrim, who was hiding behind a staff. Klaus continued to lie on the snow, trying to get up. Mirim urged him to get up quickly and get out of there before they came to their senses. The Yeti that was hit by the charge was almost unharmed and looked at the magician angrily. Grabbing a piece of a log that was nearby, the Yeti lifted it over his head and prepared to throw. Mirim quickly realized that he was aiming at her, so the girl immediately realized that her affairs were also bad. Swinging hard, the snow monster threw a log broken by Mirim's magic and hit the target clearly. The girl was thrown aside, but she continued to hold her weapon tightly. After such a blow, Mirim was immobilized. She was lying in the snow and moaning softly from the pain she received during a collision with a large frozen log. Klaus looked a little closer and saw that the girl was still alive. He thought that the girl was lucky because there was snow under her, which softened the fall a little and made it non-lethal. The Yetis continued to come closer, having received a small addition to their ranks. There were about 6 of them now, and they were all looking at the girl on the other side of the slope. After the wounded Yeti let out his scream again, the others began to jump up, trying to get to the other side to deal with their abuser. Klaus quickly got to his feet and looked around, watching the actions of the monsters. They completely ignored him and rushed to the other side. Klaus did not understand the reason for this behavior. He thought that they were all targeting Mirim because she had magic. The guy took out his blade and began to attack the enemies in the back. Considering that he hit one of their pack, the Yeti didn't give a damn about the guy, and they continued to strive to get to Mirim, who continued to lie in the snow. Opening the panel, the guy drew attention to 2 functions: automatic battle and automatic return. Time was running out, and if he left the place alone, he would have enough time. Klaus thought that the Yetis were monsters of a higher level than themselves. The guy knew perfectly well that they would tear them into small pieces in a second. After that, he got off the ground and, just like the Yeti, jumped over the ravine quite deftly, bypassing the monsters. The guy stopped in front of Mirim and turned to the monsters covering the girl. Klaus reopened his panel and selected automatic combat. The guy said it would only be now, but she must remember that Klaus is not her friend. The panel displayed the purpose of the battle: to defeat the snow giant in the amount of 8 pieces. It took 10.5 minutes to fight. Mirim pronounced Nordal's name with great difficulty. 138 Klaus glared at the high-ranking monsters and then firmly said that he would not give them Mirim. The guy also added that the girl needs to be patient a little more, just 10.5 minutes. Klaus, to consolidate, still said that the girl should remember that they are not friends. The adventurer is free to choose, and he might not save her, and he won't even get anything for it. But Klaus will do it. The Yetis dispersed to the sides, taking 2 guys into their entourage. Klaus prepared to activate his automatic battle skill by raising his hand. Mirim, on the other hand, was closely watching what was happening. Everything happened in a matter of seconds. The Yetis were breathing heavily, preparing to attack. But Klaus gradually began to disperse at this time, as the system had already completed its analysis. His body gradually continued to disappear into thin air, and Mirim did not understand what was happening now. Klaus hadn't told her about the skill he possessed. Mirim began to gradually get to her feet, shouting Klaus's name. At this time, the wind began to rise near the Yetis who were standing in front, which dispersed the snow. She kept shouting his name, but nothing happened. The Yetis that were nearby began to growl. For reference, the ice giants were mid-level winter mountain monsters and had a habit of sleeping standing up, always waking up in a terrible mood. Many consider them the invisible killers of the snow-capped mountains. Mirim, rubbing his eyes, thought that even these monsters in the mountains pose a high danger to the best adventurers because they are not visible when they attack. Mirim, not watching Klaus, thought that things were very bad. Something had to be done immediately before the monsters interrupted the life of a girl with magical abilities. Somewhere high in the mountains, a certain group has pitched a tent, near which they light 2 large bonfires. A certain man used listening skills and then followed his mistress with a report. The man added that he did everything as his mistress asked. After that, he definitely heard Klaus screaming. That would be Lie Chain, who ordered 8 giants to be set against the boy. The girl at this time used all the amenities that were needed. She had a glass of hot drink in her hand, and she asked for some more firewood, as it was starting to freeze. The man objected, saying that a little more and their tent would start burning. The girl put her glass on a small table, laughing loudly. After that, she said she was done with her work here. Chain also said that she has no doubt that the 8 mountain giants will do their job. The girl also said that they would never leave their victim alone, and Klaus could deal with them as he pleased. Opening the tent, the girl left and headed towards the guild. She knew perfectly well that her information would help Ging build a magnificent state in the future. But she did not understand how Klaus was hindering him. But for all that, she didn't like Klaus very much either. This guy's relationship has been starting to scare since the days when they were a band. After a short stop, Shane continued on her way, continuing to laugh and say that she even envied such attention from Ging to Nordal. That was one of the reasons why he shouldn't live. Her lips trembled slightly in the cold, but nothing could remove that malicious and insidious smile from Shane's face. The girl mentally said goodbye to Klaus and wished him to burn in hell. Miriam still couldn't fully recover, and getting to her feet took an incredible amount of strength and willpower. She thought that Klaus had simply disappeared, once again leaving her. The girl couldn't believe it. She kept shouting, asking how Klaus was doing. She only heard the sounds of giants and began to wonder if the guy could have been defeated. Soon the first blood began to flow. One of the Yetis started screaming, but not as aggressively and loudly as they had done before. It was more like whining. Miriam got out from behind the stone a little, walking towards the source of the sound. The girls saw how the monster collapsed and looked up at the sky with its glassy eyes. He was already dead. The rest of the monsters immediately became alarmed and began to look around in different directions, not understanding where and who was attacking them. Miriam gripped the staff tighter, also not understanding what was going on. The girl couldn't explain it any other way. The giants who became closer to each other huddled together gradually died. They were being killed by something that was moving so fast that it couldn't be seen. Suddenly, looking towards the 2 monsters, the girl noticed the barely visible silhouette of a man with a blade. He was transparent, like a ghost. The blade rose up and soared over the giant's back. Miriam was hiding, carefully watching what would happen next in this field, where she is now. Thoughts began to appear in my head that it could be Klaus. The ghostly silhouette of Klaus pulled back the monster's mouth and then plunged his blade into the area of the unprotected neck. The flesh immediately buckled under the point of the knife and was pierced. One of their Yetis, the newly struck blade, continued to stay on his feet for a while, swaying from side to side. After that, he took a couple of wide steps and fell down next to Mary. Miriam did not lose hope and began to scream, waiting for an answer from Klaus. She wanted to understand where the guy was and exactly how he was doing it. The lack of an answer scared her. Looking at the body of another Yeti, the girl thought that the most terrible thing was that Klaus alone copes with these huge invisibles, and even with a simple, small knife, Miriam still couldn't figure out which skill Klaus possessed. She thought for a second that he might be the killer. The girl wanted to understand what else he might be hiding from his girlfriend. But right now, the most important thing was whether the guy could beat them all. Miriam continued to hope that the Yetis would not be able to notice the guy's tricks. One of the Yetis noticed a small tuft of hair and thought it might be the second lurking guy who was now killing his comrades. The crest was on the snowball where Miriam was hiding. The girl also noticed that one of the Yetis was aiming towards the magician, intending to attack the lump. With one powerful blow of his paw, the Yeti immediately demolished the snow partition, behind which Miriam was located. The girl managed to jump aside, dodging. She immediately realized that if the Yeti had launched an attack, then he had definitely noticed Klaus. The girl's face was slightly wet from the snow and she started shouting her friend's name. A small piece of the guy's hair flew through the air, which continued to twitch from side to side in the wind. The monster and Miriam were watching this trick closely. The girl stopped shouting the guy's name, realizing that it could be a trap. The Yeti stood right above her and bared his teeth, being terribly angry. Miriam started to crawl back, very scared. Quite unexpectedly for Miriam, Klaus appeared in front of her, kneeling and clutching his blade. The guy's eyes were closed, and the girl had to cover her mouth so as not to scream too much. As soon as the Yeti took a step, coolly and clearly, the boy with his eyes closed abruptly rose to his feet and plunged the knife right into the jaw of the ice giant. Miriam opened her eyes wide, completely unaware of what had happened to the guy. She clearly understood that he was completely different now, as she had never seen him before. The girl froze in place and saw Klaus giving the signal to the 2 remaining Yetis to attack him. Miriam thought that one day Klaus would definitely do something great. In any case, her heart and intuition told her so. Klaus continued to stand in place with his eyes closed, waiting for the opponents to attack him. The remaining mountain giant stood in place and looked at the bodies of the other dead relatives with undisguised panic. His gaze was trying to find the boy with the blade who had done all this. Suddenly noticing the young man's body, the monster rushed towards him, starting to roar loudly. The terrifying scream echoed in the mountains, causing chilling fear in all living beings in the area. Buried under the snow, Klaus aimed the blade at the beast's gaping mouth, instantly finishing it off. Quickly pulling his hand back, Klaus continued to lie down, and the Yeti collapsed next to him. The battle was over. The timer was already at 0, and the evil souls of monsters began to leave this world, breaking out of their bodies, becoming ice ghosts. Klaus began to be filled with energy, which followed immediately after the level increase. This fight gave him a rise of several points. Soon, the boy began to open his eyes again. There were thoughts in his head that he couldn't see anything at all again. When Klaus came to himself, he was sure that he had already opened his eyes, and did not understand if everything was over and where Harem was now. The stream of thoughts continued. The guy very far away heard a voice that prayed to God that the guy was alive. The voice said that Klaus could rest for a while, but he shouldn't fall asleep. The voice became fainter and fainter. Klaus began to slowly open his eyes. There was something soft in his hands, like a toy that squeezed pleasantly. Soon Klaus began to see the picture around him. The guy was sitting at the dining table and kneading a small fresh bun of bread in his hands. Suddenly Liz called out to him. The girl was sticking something in her plate with a fork, but soon turned her attention to her brother, who immediately told him to stop doing that. Liz noticed that you can't mess with food. It was a big surprise for Klaus to see Liz here. He couldn't believe that the guy was at home with his sister right now. He looked out at the street, where small birds were visible. Continuing to look around, Klaus turned in the other direction. After that, he began to talk, sharing his feelings that the guy had just fought on a snowy mountain. Liz started asking him what happened next. Klaus looked at his sister in surprise and asked if she remembered about 10 minutes and 28 seconds. The guy also started to remember what happened to him when he finally made the last hit. Liz's voice said that he fell unconscious afterwards. Klaus asked wildly if that was the case, to which Liz immediately agreed. The girl said that she felt that Klaus was already at the limit at that moment. After that, Liz began to list the details that were present at that moment, namely, a peaceful face and a very cold body. The guy immediately jumped up from his seat. Klaus gripped the bread in his hands a little tighter as his suggestion, which he wanted to share, seemed intimidating. The guy slowly asked if he was in heaven now. Liz began to tremble, after which she told her brother that this was not the case. The girl also asked Klaus to stop talking nonsense, or else she would take action. After that, she pointed at her brother with a fork that was very close to him and said that if he did not stop, then indeed he would end up in paradise. Her gaze was somehow unreal. The thought came to Klaus abruptly that it was time for him to wake up. The guy abruptly opened his eyes and saw that he was still clutching something in his hand. Klaus was lying under a small blanket, and all the guy's ammunition was removed from him. There was a girl lying next to him, who was hugging him tightly to her and, apparently, was sleeping the same way as he was. The main character abruptly realized that he was definitely not in paradise. The guy abruptly pulled his hand back and began to embarrassingly hide his eyes from the girl, who had already woken up too and wished him good morning. Suddenly, Harem jumped up abruptly, realizing that Klaus was staring at her, and shouted at him to stop looking at her. Klaus began to justify himself, saying that it was an accident. Since Harem had previously tried to convince Klaus for a long time that she was a guy, the young man pointed at her and said that she was cheating on him after all. Harem swung her boot and called him silly. After Harem screamed and Klaus turned away, the young man sat silently, looking into one of the empty corners. Klaus knew he was in complete shock. He almost died, woke up, and there was a beautiful girl next to him, and even with an excellent figure. After that, Klaus pulled himself together, saying that he had imagined it, feeling a little discomfort and stiffness in his body. The guy looked at his arms and legs, and then realized that all his limbs were bandaged, as usual with Mary. The young man felt a tingling sensation that did not cease to haunt him. The reason was unclear to him, and Klaus began to gradually untie the body. As soon as he touched his hand, he immediately cried out from the pain that followed. Harem held out her hand and asked Klaus not to make any sudden movements. Klaus immediately started asking about what happened to his hands. The girl said that he got frostbite on both hands and feet and almost died. She then added that she had saved him by making a quick decision. Klaus looked through the girl who was trying to keep making claims against him. The guy thought that he actually almost died, and his sister was right when she said about the high danger of the skill that Klaus possesses. Klaus began to gradually recall everything that had happened on the battlefield. After she stopped screaming, Klaus exhaled easily, thinking that if it hadn't been for her, and to admit it to himself, that the girl had really become different. Immediately, in her favorite manner, Marine gave a thumbs up and smiled broadly. The girl, being pleased, said that he could not pay attention to everything, because friends always help each other. Klaus immediately jumped up and began to get dressed, saying along the way that he was grateful. The guy also added that he would return the favor and then repeated that they were still not friends. Harem started to get angry, asking the reason why Klaus is so cruel. She urged him to stop being stubborn, to which he began to shut her up, saying that he had just found out that Harem was a girl. Removing his already dry equipment from the sticks that stood by the campfire, Klaus rushed to one of the walls of their makeshift place for the night and knocked out a smooth piece of snow cut through with a knife. The young man went out and began to look around, trying to assess the situation and find some clues. Marem also looked out of the window, watching the snow outside. After that, Klaus turned around and told the girl that he completely did not understand the reason why Marem wanted to be friends with him so much. He is also, as she has seen, not the strongest adventurer. Marem chuckled, saying that she was prompted to do so by the skill she possesses. Klaus asked her again, and she immediately added that she had a unique skill called premonition. Helping the girl out of the snow tent, Klaus continued to listen to Marem. She explained that, following her skill, she never makes mistakes. The girl said that she finds him everywhere, wherever Klaus goes. And yet, she decides whether to listen to her skill or not. When she got up, she smiled and said that he was not so simple, so she chose him. Marem smiled and asked about what Klaus would do now. She added that there was very little time left, and then provocatively asked if he would give up. This immediately set the guy off. Klaus slung his bag over his shoulder and said they couldn't wait for him to put his hand down. After that, the guy told Marem that they were moving out. The goal the guys needed finally appeared on the horizon. A ghoul. Klaus said it was a dangerous monster. He's not that fast, of course, but he's as strong as a demon. After that, Klaus added that for the conditions for the appearance of a ghoul, only two things are needed: carcasses and raw earth. There were various kinds of ghouls, so you need to be careful with them. Klaus said with his mouth full that they needed a plan. After being on the road for a long time, the guy finally got his sister's bento, which now seemed tastier than any delicacy. After that, Klaus, who was holding the reins, said that he already had this plan, of course. Marem was surprised, but then said that, with all this, there is one problem. Marem, who was sitting behind, also held a bento in her hand. She said that all the ghouls had already been destroyed, but no new ones had appeared yet. Marem suggested that he hunt someone else. Klaus said that only the lower ghouls were cleaned up. The little ghouls were quite weak and had low intelligence. Marem confirmed her words that there were no weak ones left. After chewing a little, Klaus said that all the others were left, except the little ones. He also said that the average is just a bunch, but his goal is above average. Marem turned to him with a not very pleased face, and then said that it sounded too much. The girl said that she doubted that they would be able to cope with the supreme ghoul. Klaus looked at the panel and said that's what it says in the automatic function. There were only 7 hours left until the end of the exam, but they would not have time to cope with everything. Marem was surprised by how cool Klaus's skill was. After that, Klaus looked at the tasks for Marem. He said that only collecting herbs would be optimal for her, but with monsters, everything is really bad. Still, they had to hunt ghouls. Marem kept looking around, talking about what a cool skill the guy had. She also said that he would be well paid if he just took on the job of an informant. Klaus turned around and added that his skill showed Lee the information he had encountered before. They didn't know exactly what to expect when faced with a large ghoul. Klaus asked Marem if she was ready to move on, even knowing that. Marem smiled and said that her hands were itching with anticipation, and since they had already eaten, it was time to pack. Klaus smiled and said that he agreed with that, so they would drive at speed. Their destination now was the old church where, in theory, they should encounter the one they were looking for. Switching his gaze to the donkey, Klaus told the girl that he had given the animal a pill with which its speed rises by as much as 40%, so Harem should be ready for this. The girl just started laughing, preparing that they would never fall like last time because she was already ready. Before she could finish, she heard Klaus activate his skill. So considering that they increased the speed of the cargo donkey, they had to get to the church in almost 3.5 hours. The timer began to gradually fade to 0. As time passed, Klaus finally opened his eyes and smiled, solemnly declaring that they had arrived. The guy looked at the building ahead and said that this was the old church. Klaus looked further ahead, saying that there is a dungeon under the church itself which he has never been to before. All this was both interesting and very dangerous. Klaus also said that it was possible that the Pens of Geen, who had been plotting against them earlier, could have reached this place. After that, the guy said that he definitely couldn't destroy the boss. As soon as Klaus finished speaking, he realized that he had received no response. The guy started to turn around, and then he was afraid that he might lose her. Hearing someone moaning softly somewhere below, the guy picked up his big raincoat and saw how Harem continued to hold on to it tightly, clinging with all his might. There were tears in Harem's eyes, and the girl herself continued to declare in a trembling voice that she was not at all afraid. That's just not at all. Which she also tried to convince Klaus of. After that, she began to retell their movement in fragments, saying that it was so easy for her on the river. In his skill mode, Klaus always chose the shortest path. Klaus calmed the girl down and said that they should hurry up as they had very little time. They paid the entrance fee, which was 2 bronze coins per person, and started to enter. Klaus walked in front, holding a lamp, which they also rented upstairs from the supervisors of this place. Harem followed him, constantly looking around. Harem turned around, convincing herself that she was not at all afraid of the dead who lay in the crypt. At the same time, the girl was shaking violently. After that, she cringed and clutched her staff tighter, admitting out loud that these are actually quite gloomy places for a girl. Klaus decided to make fun of the girl. He took the lamp, held it up to his head, and suddenly shouted, addressing her in a hoarse voice. After that, he began to wheeze, and Harem, as expected, screamed all over the floor. After Harem cooled her ardor by running after the guy a little, she took the lead position, taking the lantern from Klaus. Klaus asked her how well she knew the place. Harem said she didn't know this dungeon at all. Soon, descending lower, they came across a strong door, from which, apparently, the dangerous depths began. First, Klaus opened the metal bolt, through which it was possible to see the presence of someone ahead. It was only the 6th floor, and after that, Klaus declared that everything was clean. The guys were already feeling tense, even though they hadn't reached it yet. The guy added that even before they started building a city here, there was already a dungeon. But then, to get rid of it, people built a church. However, the dungeon was too deep, and the construction of the church did not help much. Miasma gradually accumulated, and it was noticed only when the risk of the threat began to grow. After that, the guy said that from time to time people were sent here anyway. A-rank adventurers cleared the floors and destroyed the monsters here when they started the climb too high. After that, Klaus said in frustration that the adventurers had stopped coming here because of the low pay that had been offered recently. Well, this is a church, so assignments from them are accepted as a tribute to the ministry. After that, Klaus added that it was for this reason that they were not taken. And after that, all the doors were simply closed with various seals. This was done so that the most dangerous one would not crawl out. The girl first asked again when she found out that there was a most dangerous one here. After that, she seemed to hear something and jerked to the side, shouting what it was just now. Klaus continued to walk on calmly and said that sometimes this monster goes upstairs. And he also added that if this happens, then Harem will have to run away immediately. The girl did not understand what Klaus was talking about now. Harem thought he was laughing at her. Klaus said he was serious about all this. He will buy time by playing the bait, and Harem will run away. Harem started to object, but Klaus immediately explained that his automatic return function would definitely take him upstairs. He can't do anything about it. Everything will be automatic, but she will only bring him back. Klaus continued to walk slowly ahead and said, without turning around, that he was very glad when the girl saved him from the Yeti, so he did not want her to die. It was for this reason that he asked Harem to run away. The girl smiled and said that he would do so, but then added that Klaus likes to show off. After that, the girl put her hand on the guy's shoulder and said that he probably forgot something. Her premonition skill immediately senses danger. Starting to walk around the guy, Marim threw out the phrase that they would have time to escape anyway, even without using Klaus's skills. The girl added that he could completely rely on her. Klaus smiled and said that he trusted the girl. After that, Marim shouted that they should speed up in that case. She added when she saw the door to the 10th floor that the dungeon had finally begun. On one of the floors, Klaus shouted that their target was a big ghoul. They will hide behind the weak and attack from the back. The guy raised his hand, exulting at his words. Marim told the guy that it was wrong. Klaus emotionally said that this time, Marim should not let him down with a fireball, which was very important. They continued to descend floor by floor, approaching the door of the 15th floor, which already felt the signs of a dangerous monster in the dungeon. A small bat carried a folded letter to its owner, notifying of the presence of guests on the dungeon floor. The owner of the mouse said that he had come after all. The girl was sipping tea and said that Klaus, of course, did it in vain. Now there was nothing left but to play with the guy with the help of her army of dolls. It was Mika Kisaragi, also a member of the Class A Special Bond Group. The girl had the ability to give life, so she deftly wielded the servants of their inanimate dolls. Above one of the doors, there was finally an inscription left by the guild, stating that the dungeon begins next. The guild staff also asked that the adventurers not forget to close the door behind them. Klaus took hold of the handle and opened the door, leading the way to the floor. They immediately saw a bunch of different miasmas and monsters that were like ectoplasm, completely shapeless. Klaus raised his hand emotionally, smiling broadly. This was exactly what he expected. The guy exclaimed and said it was an excellent dungeon. Marim's reaction was the opposite. The girl immediately screamed when she saw all this. As soon as they were on the floor, Marim's skill kicked in almost immediately, and she had a bad feeling about it. Marim kept saying that it was very dangerous here. Her skill was ringing all the time, hinting that it was impossible to stay here for long. Klaus said that in that case, they would move quickly as planned. Going further into the dungeon, Klaus armed himself with a bone, as he had done in the cemetery, and hid behind a column, periodically looking out to assess the situation. Marim, on the other hand, very often stayed outside the door until Klaus was sure to walk the path, staying safe. Her skill did not stop subsiding, so she also listened to him, being very afraid of the corridors. Klaus called out to the girl and said that their plan would be quite simple. He would be the bait and go first, as they had agreed. When he finds the ghoul, he will start running away, leading him. After that, the guy will start running to the safe zone, continuing to tease the monster that will follow the target. There will also be a small pile of bodies. As soon as the ghoul is here, Marim will have to jump out of this pile and use her fireball, which will destroy the monster running into the trap. Marim began to scream, outraged by such an algorithm. She didn't understand why the girl had to wait in a pile of corpses, because she would cry. Klaus said it was just a necessity. Smiling, the guy said it was time to stop joking and move on to the real plan. Klaus immediately made it clear that the automatic function also has its disadvantages. He emphasized that further on is the territory of death. Therefore, they had to revitalize the safe area as much as they could. He then added that he trusted Mary to watch his back. Marim hit him lightly on the head with her staff, saying that if he wanted the girl to do this, then let him not anger her. Klaus grinned, apologizing, because he just wanted to lighten the atmosphere. After that, Klaus said that it was time for them to put everything into action. The guy thought that their plan to hunt the big ghoul was just perfect and should work. So Marim stayed in the safe zone, and Klaus began to move forward. This floor was empty, which was very suspicious because the danger should only increase. Marim shouted at the guy, telling Klaus to be careful, because since that time, her bad feeling has not subsided. Moreover, this premonition should cross all boundaries soon. More quietly, Marim added that she had a feeling that if she looked back now, she would immediately see the god of death himself in front of her. Just thinking about it, something began to push the girl to look back. She turned around and saw a huge glowing ghoul with a very strange head shape. The girl couldn't understand the reason why this monster was here. It was a safe area that the ghouls couldn't get into because it was guarded by a seal on the doors. Marim continued to carefully look at the monster in the distance as suddenly and abruptly it rushed to run in her direction. The girl immediately screamed. She didn't know what to do now. Gathering her thoughts, The girl realized that if she did nothing, she would definitely die. Marin began to charge her staff with energy, and then released a fireball. The ghoul was so big and dense that he almost did not feel the magic directed in his direction. He kept running, and the ball just ricocheted off to the side. The girl was surprised, thinking that this was probably just some kind of joke. After all, the ghoul managed to redirect the ball with his hand. At the same time, Klaus carefully passed on. Looking around, Klaus found it very strange that there were no enemies at all. He looked around and then applied a third-level presence reading and realized where the ghouls were now. Klaus immediately moved forward, and the monsters, realizing that they had been discovered, rushed to attack. The guy couldn't understand such high intelligence in ghouls because they were hiding and waiting. Klaus grabbed his blade and then shouted furiously, asking where they came from. Swinging, the guy aimed his blow at the head of one of the ghouls, but his weapon immediately shattered into pieces. The ghoul continued to look at the guy provocatively, slightly grinning. Klaus was amazed because he didn't even hit him, couldn't do a single piece of damage. The second ghoul, who was behind, swung his leg and threw the guy to the other side of the corridor. Klaus, looking at them, realized that this was not even the average level, but rather the highest. The guy landed painfully, still holding on to his broken knife. Marim immediately ran up to him, who began to pick up the guy, asking how he was. Klaus, cringing his face in pain, said that he had only flown a little. After that, he apologized to Mary and added that this dungeon was still very strange. Opening the panel of the skill, the guy swore and said that he thought so. There's no ghoul here that he fought. After all, the automatic function was triggered under certain conditions. In order for everything to work, the guy had to have fought this or that monster before. But maybe it didn't work if I couldn't damage it last time. Something had to be done. Klaus knew that he didn't even have a trump card up his sleeve right now. There was an urgent need to get out of this mess somehow, protecting Mary. The ghouls began to surround the two adventurers, who were right in their palm. Marim began to make more efforts to lift the guy, repeating that the main thing now is not to give up. The girl also added that Klaus is not the only one to blame for all this. She has made mistakes too, but right now a premonition tells her not to give up. Marim clung to Klaus's shoulders, telling him over and over again not to give up. Her words echoed in Nordal's head, and it helped Klaus gain his resolve. Marim also said that together they will definitely be able to overcome all this. Klaus abruptly sat up and prepared himself, saying that in that case they would start hunting. Klaus said they got into a pretty serious mess. One of the monsters was in front, and two more were in the back. All of them, without a doubt, were very strong. Suddenly, another sound was heard, which made the walls of the floor shake. Klaus started to look around, and Marim immediately rushed forward, pushing the guy aside. With a deafening crash, someone else stumbled into the floor corridor, breaking through columns of sturdy marble in their path. Mary managed to save Klaus from this scourge. It was another ghoul that was also different from the usual average monsters. He was huge, 2.5 times healthier than the other three. As a result, the situation became more complicated once again. The 4 higher ghouls were slowly advancing towards them, driving the guys into a small corner, where they hid behind one of the broken columns. Klaus looked around and saw an iron poker, quite simple. He understood that he was left without a weapon, so this is his only option so far. Clutching her, Klaus whispered that everything was fine, because he had been used to this for a long time. The guy promised that they would sort it all out now. Marim called out to the young man. Marim, who was already starting to have tears in her eyes, pointed to the blocked exit with great panic in her face and voice. She said he was covered in debris. The girl started shaking even harder, calling out to Klaus. In a whisper, she asked why they didn't attack right away. Klaus howled, interpreting that everything was fine and not worth worrying about. When asked by Marim, Klaus said that maybe the ghouls just want to scare them, or maybe they are consulting with each other who they will eat first. Klaus smiled nervously, ending with the phrase that they must be gourmets. Marim was horrified, realizing that he probably tasted better than Klaus. So, it was time to stop joking. Marim asked what their plan was. Klaus said that while the monsters are playing, they could either escape or come up with an escape plan. Klaus opened his panel and said that it would take them 100 hours to escape. The guy asked if Marim would be able to follow him, to which the girl replied that she would not, because she would simply die. The second option was to go and fight. Monsters were not displayed by the skill. The girl asked that this was the function with which he defeated the ice giants. She could also help. Klaus said that the conditions for activating the skill were not met. The function is activated only if the battle has already been fought with this monster. Remembering even the moment when he attacked with a knife, it didn't even do any harm to the monster. The guy thought he just needed to hit them harder. Klaus really understood that it would not be so easy for him to defeat these three. Even doing a little damage to them is already a real effort, which is hard to do. Suddenly, Klaus noticed one very interesting detail. The guy noticed the hand of one of the ghouls, whom Marim saw first. There was a small burn on his arm. Klaus pointed it out to the girl and told her to look at it too. He asked Marim what was on the big ghoul's arm. It looked like a small wound. Since Klaus didn't know this because he was attacked by two other ghouls at the time, the girl explained that it could be because of the fireball. She apologized and said that she had only offended him a little. At the same moment, they looked at each other sharply. They simultaneously came up with the same idea, which they immediately voiced. Fire is a ghoul's weakness. The girl began to carefully load her staff. In a whisper, she repeated that no matter how strong these monsters were, they retained their class weakness for fire. Miriam began her witchcraft, gradually speaking fire attack. She made the guy promise that everything would be fine and asked him not to die. After the charge had accumulated, they began to act, and the girl released the ball. The ball flew towards one of the ghouls and Klaus immediately chased after the same ball. The guy held his new weapon high, which now had a small piece of cloth on it. Running past, Klaus set fire to the fabric with a fireball and was now ready to inflict the damage that could pass over the dead. That was their plan. Hitting one of them with a poker, into which a distracting fireball flew. On the panel of Klaus's skill, 4 dead men were immediately reflected. The time to deal with them was 24 minutes. After that, Klaus immediately deftly dodged the monster's counterattack and flying under his hand immediately shouted to Mary that the conditions were met and everything would take 24 minutes and 13 seconds. Miriam nervously looked towards the guy, surprised that the time was so long. The thought flashed through her mind that last time he defeated 8 giants in about 10 minutes. The ghoul swung once again and was already able to hit, catching only the weapons that Klaus had in his hands. He started activating the automatic combat function, which was triggered. Suddenly, Marim realized that Klaus was unarmed, so she thought that he would not be able to activate the skill. But Klaus was already in the middle of the action, and all 4 ghouls were flying at him. Starting to deftly dodge, Klaus first pulled out the arm of one of the skinny ghouls, breaking it. Marim stared at it all with her mouth wide open. She didn't believe that Klaus was doing all this. Klaus's skill turned everything against the very same high-ranked monsters. They literally began to destroy themselves by striking. When he landed on his feet, crouching slightly, at that moment one of the enemies blew off the other's head. It flew off to the side. The automatic function showed that it would take 24 minutes to fight the 4 ghouls. One of the ghouls with long hair tried to attack the main character with his weapon, but the latter deftly dodged her with his body. Suddenly, the blade flew straight towards Klaus. But the latter, still with his eyes closed, extended his hand, thereby stopping his action in his direction. At that moment, he pulled this ghoul by the clothes, due to which the enemy turned in the air, and her weapon was already directed towards another ghoul. The main character managed to duck to the ground, and the ghoul's weapon cut off the arm of the second enemy. Klaus grabbed the victim by the arm and knocked him to the ground with all his strength. Then they simultaneously decided to attack the main character. He found himself in the middle of the action, and then something incredible happened. The enemy split into pairs and began to destroy each other. Only 2 of the ghouls remained on their feet, who were still alive and remained dangerous. After looking at the boy in surprise, they rushed to attack him further. Miriam didn't understand what was going on. Looking at what Klaus was doing, the girl thought it was too brilliant. Their magic couldn't even harm them as their bodies were too hard. Therefore, they can only kill themselves. Klaus had deliberately set it up so that they attacked each other themselves, circling in a small space. She wondered if anyone could come up with such a thing, or figure it out on their own, using this method in their mind. Marim looked at the guy and thought about how he was still without a tower. Klaus continued to keep his eyes closed and move with the skill. Thoughts were slipping through his mind at this time, as he told Marim that his role was to fight, and she had to find a way out. The main character understood that the automatic combat was activated due to the fact that they were affected by fire. He was still worried about what would happen to him after the fight. Klaus understood that if he defeated them, then more enemies might come at that moment, and then what would happen to them? The automatic function could not be resumed immediately. The stream of thoughts continued in my head. Marin began to get indignant, saying that the division of roles between them was unequal. His tasks are much more dangerous, but Klaus asked not to worry. He just smiled at the girl, not letting his fear get the better of him, and said that he believed Marim's wonderful premonition skill. Looking straight into her eyes, he also told Marim to believe too. Marim just thought about what a goofball he was. She doesn't say that everything is bad, but that doesn't mean that everything is going well. The girl also thought that maybe this feature was really a win-win. But after the guy fought with the giants, he lay unconscious all night, and this enemy was stronger. Marim confided in him, saying that she understood everything. The girl shouted after him so that he would not die in those 24 minutes. And if he was weak after the battle, she would still take his body away from here. Marim was going to continue to believe him until the bad feeling turned into a critical one. At this moment, Klaus continued his battle with the ghouls. When there was only one ghoul left, the last one they were initially able to burn with a fireball, he lifted his head and rushed towards Klaus. His head started to open up, showing what was inside, all the time. There were many sharp teeth hidden. Klaus moved behind a pillar and reached for something on the floor. Klaus raised a sharp hand that resembled a blade. Previously, it belonged to a girl who was also a ghoul. The monster opened its mouth and was heading for the boy. The head of the last monster immediately separated from the body with one blow. The ghoul took a few more steps forward and collapsed, stopping moving in any way. The timer has stopped running. Klaus himself, when the effect of his skill stopped, grabbed his body and coughed loudly, spitting blood out of his mouth. Before he could fully open his eyes, the guy fell on his side. Marin felt that something was approaching them. The skill said that danger was moving from the back or from below, and this was a critical level of danger. Klaus continued to lie on the ground, writhing in pain. He felt terrible when he came to his senses a little. The adventurer began to look for something in his pockets. The guy suddenly took out a small ampoule containing a high-level healing potion, like the one that Tiela had once given him. He immediately felt much better, and Klaus realized that he had bought it for a reason then. Still, the guy remembered the elf who told him that if he didn't want to die, it was better to spend money. Klaus looked ahead and saw the bodies of the monsters lying motionless. The guy realized that he had managed to win this battle against 4. The guy started to lift himself off the floor, realizing that he was trying, but even this is only part of what they have to do here. Still, it was hard, and now it was necessary to come up with further actions. The door, which was blocked, suddenly slammed shut. It could have been done by someone outside, or she did it herself. Monsters didn't do that exactly, which was scary. After Klaus turned to the door, he immediately heard several targets start hammering into it. Looking through the bolt, the guy saw a bunch of ghouls and shouted Marim's name. Footsteps began to approach Klaus. The guy knew perfectly well that these were not ghouls, and the door can only seal the exit. Klaus heard behind his back that he was good for nothing. A lot of objects were approaching him along the corridor, which was carried on their hands by a palanquin with its owner inside. Klaus immediately found her painfully familiar. The boy was horrified when he recognized the girl's voice and realized that it was Misa Kisaragi. The guy pointed his finger at her and said that it was she, a member of the special bond group, who gives life with her skill. Misa held up her finger, saying that the boy was talking to her in an inappropriate way. He just called her Misa and doesn't even seem to understand who he's messing with. The girl waved her hand in the direction of the guy as her soldiers immediately rushed to him, holding out a hand armed with long steel claws. Klaus looked around and did not understand who made up her army. They weren't ghouls or zombies. After that, he remembered the girl's ability and guessed that the girl could control inanimate objects. 3 years ago, Misa said that she could control all objects in general, but she was best at controlling dolls in the form of people. Klaus shouted sharply that they were dead, peering into their faces. They were the ones she used as her dolls, which she controlled and set on the boy. Misa said that Klaus understood everything correctly. The girl added that this is her new army, which she dressed up. Misa sarcastically asked Klaus's opinion about this masquerade. After that, the girl said that there were also those who went to feed the ghouls. Klaus didn't understand what she was talking about. But Misa immediately explained that ghouls change if they eat corpses, so she fed those four well. Klaus immediately realized that it was Misa who made those monsters the way they were. One of her subordinates knocked the guy down, and Misa herself continued to laugh. The girl said that it was noble of her to make useless dead people useful. After that, she made an even more intimidating grin, and said that now it was Klaus's turn to sleep here forever. She also thanked him for dispelling the boredom. Misa confessed to Klaus that initially she had completely different plans for the guy, but then she remembered that she could arrange a special performance for herself. She thought Klaus was discouraged right now. Klaus waved to the part of the blade that he had left and chopped off several of the hands of the dolls standing next to him. He angrily asked the girl if it was fun for her to interfere with the exam. Misa started laughing nastily, screaming for Klaus to start dying. Geen will give her a bonus for destroying the guy, so she shares with him with her unique skill. Klaus waved his hand, shouting that he refused. The guy looked at the guy and said that it had already been a minute that he needed to restore his strength. It will take Klaus only 5.5 minutes to deal with all of Misa's subordinates. He shouted at the girl to wait a bit, and he would spoil her performance. Misa shouted that she was not as insignificant as Klaus. She has become stronger during this time and can now subdue a huge army of dead bodies. She didn't even understand how the guy was risking getting into this at all. Mila continued to chatter, saying that Klaus greatly underestimated her and was doing it very unnecessarily. It is for this reason that he will disappear as a useless being. Klaus has already activated his function and began to chop up all the enemies in his path. He continued to use the blades of the supreme ghoul he had slain not so long ago. Misa looked at all this in shock and began to change her face, seeing how the guy ruthlessly and easily dealt with her numerous army of the dead. She absolutely couldn't understand the reason why this was happening. Klaus rushed towards her, while Mila ordered to start shooting at the boy. For Klaus, this was not an obstacle. The guy just started dodging the crossbow bolts flying at him, remaining completely unharmed. The girl watched in horror as only the remains of her army remained. All this time, she considered the boy a complete jerk, so she did not understand how he was coping now. 26 of the 49 dead have already been sentenced to death. Klaus continued to swing the blades, keeping his eyes closed, and when he reached the ones holding the stretcher, Misa immediately fell, sticking her nose into the floor. There was only one thing in the girl's mind. She had lost now. But how? Because Klaus is worthless. She looked at herself and also thought that she had stained her clothes with blood that belonged to her. The girl grabbed a handkerchief and began to wipe her nose. She thought that no one would dare to laugh at her, because she had already overcome the 100th level and would not leave it like this without consequences. Misa got to her feet, continuing to resent the fact that an A-rank adventurer was slighted by some inferior. This will never happen, and then they shouted that they would destroy Klaus. She grinned and thought that she wouldn't even disguise it all as an accident. He'll just destroy her, and it doesn't matter that she becomes an accused, because she doesn't care now. Misa believed that absolutely everything was allowed to her, because she was with Gain. He has connections, which means that there will be no punishment for her. The girl took out a dagger and ran towards the guy, shouting that she would upset him, but he would never have passed the exam anyway, because they would have bribed everyone. She also added that he would die now without becoming a middle-rank adventurer. She also said that even if Klaus begged for mercy, she would still not have mercy. Approaching, the guy knocked her weapon out of her hands and destroyed the last dead man with it. The timer has finished going. Klaus opened his eyes and looked around. Misa was lying at his feet looking at the guy. Klaus slung the blade over his shoulder and asked her what Misa was talking about.